Hi everyone, and welcome to the launch of our latest campaign, Planet Saving Innovations. So we have a stellar lineup for you all today, starting with a special keynote from Hannah Jones, CEO of the Earthshot Prize. And then we'll be followed by a series of panel discussions covering important topics such as disrupting climate change, closing the loop on plastics, creative chemistry, rethinking dyes, designing in harmony with nature, and the policy briefing, navigating the regulatory landscape. So I'm Amy, head of Europe, the Mills Fabrica. The Mills Fabrica, we are a global platform, and we're dedicated to investing in and supporting startups that are really revolutionizing the textile and agri-food industries. So as you can see here, we have co-working spaces, both here in London and also Hong Kong, which is where we were founded. We have investment funds, so invest in startups all around the world. We have Fabrica X, which is our innovation gallery and concept store. And we also engage in strategic partnerships and host events for the industry like this one today. So planet-saving innovations, what is it? What does it mean? And what is it all about? So Planet Saving Innovations campaign is created as a call to action in response to our planet's state of crisis. It's inspired by the Planetary Boundaries framework, which defines safe operating space within which humans can thrive. And the framework presents 9 ecological systems that collectively influence the global environmental stability. Now, the bad news is that 6 of these have now been crossed, but the good news is that there is still time to get us back to the safe operating space, but we need to act urgently. And to quote Barack Obama, who sums this up beautifully, we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it. And from this framework, we've identified 6 key measurable impact themes: water, land use, microplastics, waste, climate change, and chemicals. And Planet Saving Innovations showcases the top 10 innovators that are all reducing the negative impact across these 6 themes. And you'll hear from them all today across the different panel discussions. So meet our 10 exhibitors, from 3D weaving technology to enzymatic textile recycling, nanomaterials and plastic-free alternative materials to dyes powered by bacteria. Each startup has been carefully selected based on the positive planetary impact that they are creating. We recognize that innovators cannot work alone and succeed in this age of the Anthropocene. For the last 12,000 years, the Holocene period that was characterized by relatively stable and warm conditions, also known as the Garden of Eden, is no more. Now, in the age of humans, in just 50 years, we've pushed our Earth's climate into a state of crisis. Now we need the whole industry's collaborative efforts to get us back to the new age of the Garden of Eden. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Hannah Jones, CEO of the Earthshot Prize, to give our opening keynote.
Thank you so much. I don't know how I followed the Garden of Eden, but I will try. Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Jones. I am the CEO of the Earthshot Prize, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today, particularly because this is personal. I joined Nike in 1998 as one of their first corporate responsibility team members. And we were on a mission to try to solve the issue of sweatshops and human rights in supply chains. And from then to also address all the environmental impacts of those supply chains and our entire business model. So I spent 22 years at Nike, 18 of which I spent as their first chief sustainability officer, and 4 years running their first ever innovation incubator. So what you do today is really personal to me. I'm going to take you back to 1998. Was anyone actually alive in 1998 apart from me? Thank you. Right. For those of you that weren't alive in 1998, God, that's miserable. We had Nokia phones. We had fax machines. And Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio had just starred in the Titanic. Does this give you a sense of the world that we lived in? Also in 1998, there was no such thing as ESG. There were no sustainability classes. There were no chief sustainability officers. There were very few corporate responsibility teams in business, only amongst those who were being attacked, us. And it was a completely unknown and white space. There were very few people you could turn to and say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Can you tell me what the rules are? There were no rules. And we were making everything up all together as an emergent movement. Had we known what we know now, we would have felt more confident that we knew what we were doing. We didn't know this was going to become a movement. We were simply, all of us, on the edge of trying to solve a problem that the NGOs had surfaced rightly, which is that you have externalized the environment and social impact from your business model, and it is deeply flawed, and it is unacceptable. And during those years at Nike, I had a front row seat of looking into the underbelly of globalized supply chains and the unintended consequences of a global financial system that externalizes those impacts and rewards the opposite on the stock market. I literally traveled the world, crawling through factories, literally crawling through factories. And the team and I walked through countless worker dormitories, stood outside factory walls at 2 a.m. to see if there was excessive overtime happening, inspected mills, went back into the fields to see the cotton, understood the wastewater treatment and the chemicals going into what we were doing and putting in the market, interviewed hundreds and hundreds of women workers, sent in monitoring teams, worked with others, traced the journey of a t-shirt sold in the USA, made in China, with cotton from Pakistan, found discarded in the landfills of the Ghanese townships. And we journeyed through an emergent picture of risk, and we built new accountabilities into the business, and we did everything we could to change the system from the inside until we hit the wall. And the wall is the business model. And the wall is you can't incrementally make something bad less bad and be proud of that. You have to aim for what is good. You have to create the future you want to live in, and that is an innovation and a creativity challenge. It is not a risk and ESG compliance challenge. And at that moment, my team and I fell in love with innovation. And we picked up the entire sustainability team and we walked over to the innovation building at Nike and said, we're going to come and live here and we're going to redefine sustainability in your mindset as an opportunity, not a risk, and as the way in which we will grow Nike's business to be resilient and to respond in advance to what consumers and legal frameworks are inevitably going to demand, which is that this has got to change. And it hasn't changed fast enough, because here I am, 22, 23, 24 bloody years later, still standing in front of people. But here I am with you, and you are what give me hope. So as I fell in love with sustainable innovation and fell in love with the people that are taking those brave steps to step out of a traditional career and say, I'm going to take my time and my talent and my ingenuity and my grit and my determination, and I'm going to go try and fix one of these problems with innovation. I decided I wanted to be a part of that movement, and that I wanted to play a role in helping this movement that I could see from inside of Nike could be the change agents that could make a real difference. So in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, when I realized also that climate change was going to make COVID look like a walk in the park, I left Nike and I joined the Earthshot Prize. And at the time, the Earthshot Prize was a twinkle in its founder's eye, Prince William, the Prince of Wales. It was an idea on a very badly put together PowerPoint deck. And my Nike kind of design, I was like really challenged by this PowerPoint deck that they put together. There were no pictures. So the Earthshot Prize was founded on 2 observations and 1 inspiration. And the two observations from the prince were the following. The first was that he was traveling around the world meeting a lot of solutions in conservation, on oceans. And his observation was, I keep meeting solutions and founders and teams that are actually making an impact. They're doing great work. It's working. Why on earth is it not being scaled? Why isn't it being replicated around the world at speed? So his observation was, we have an innovation movement that's not being seen and also not being scaled fast enough. His second observation was in 2019, Climate Fridays, Greta Thunberg. His concern was that young people were going to be faced with the choice of anger, apathy, or anxiety, and that was going to lead to a mental health crisis, but also to inaction, and that we needed to create pathways in the environmental narrative that enabled young people to see opportunity, not despair. And how could we reframe the conversation away from that meta arc that we see of denial or defeatism trumping everything, trumping being the appropriate verb as well, potentially. How do we inject urgent optimism and inspire people to aspire to act? And so with those two observations, he came back and challenged the original team, and said, what am I going to do? How can I do something with my platform of privilege and power? And tell me what I can do that will be uniquely helpful. And they looked to the Moonshot Challenge that President J.F. Kennedy had launched to the American people. And if we actually went to the J.F. Kennedy Library in Boston and went into the archives, which was epic, Marilyn Monroe, all there. And in it, you start to deconstruct what happened with the Moonshot Challenge and why we can all learn from it. The first is, they were very aware, the Americans, that they were in a race to get someone on the moon. And so Kennedy goes back to Lyndon Johnson, his vice president, and says, all right, we got to beat the Russians. We got to get a man on the moon. He didn't realize that women could get to the moon as well. Well, that's another story. We'll get to that one. And Lyndon Johnson sends back a 6-page memo basically saying, there's no way we can do it. We can't do it. We don't have the money. We don't have the talent. We don't have the time. Forget it, mate. Not happening. At which point, Kennedy goes out and makes his famous moonshot speech. If you haven't seen it on YouTube, go and have a look at it. It's amazing. And he challenges the American people, but he inspires them with a simple, clear vision. In 10 years, we will land a man on the moon and we will bring him home safely. So what happens? They land a man on the moon in 7 years. And they do it through radical collaboration. They do it because thousands of people, 450,000 people actually, from across the US, from every walk of life, come together to fix every single problem that stands in the way of them getting the man to the moon and bringing him back. The second key point is that on the way to doing that, they uncover thousands of innovations that lead to economic and social progress across the world. The microwave, as an example. And thirdly, maybe most importantly, an entire generation of young men grew up wanting to be an astronaut. So what would happen if we reframed this environmental conversation and challenged ourselves to see that this is the Earthshot decade? We know that by 2030, the world needs to reduce emissions by over 40%. We need to protect 30% of oceans and fresh water and nature. And that is, to quote President Kennedy, a seemingly impossible task. And what if we were to inspire such optimism and hope and ingenuity that we led a movement together of innovation that was built on radical collaboration and actually gave us a fighting chance of turning that seemingly impossible into the new normal? That is what we are trying to help be a catalyst for. So we are a prize. Every year, we scour the planet for solutions of any kind. So they could be for-profit, not-for-profit, city, state, youth, academic. We're agnostic to the profile of the solution. But do they solve a problem in oceans, nature, waste, clean air, or climate change? And crucially, why am I here today? Because within that, we have a priority focused on fashion, which actually, if you know anything about fashion, which each of you does, runs across all of 5 of those Earthshots. And so with our community of official nominators, of which Mills Fabrica is one, thank you, very successful one too, I will say, we have every year been doubling the numbers of nominations from around the world, and we have a bias towards women-led, indigenous-led, and global south-led solutions for obvious and clear reasons, which I stand strong and proud in, irrespective of the political waves that go around us. So we're super excited about what's happening in fashion. It continues for me my journey through fashion and apparel and footwear of the last 25 years. And watching some of the nominations and the finalists and the winners come through, just 2 today that I want to profile because we love our finalists, they're part of the Earthshot family. Cirque, based in the United States, they're revolutionizing textile recycling with innovative technology that's actually scalable to tackle the waste problem that we have in this industry. They're taking post-consumer textiles, they've figured out how to turn them into high-quality fibers, and they're busy working with Zara, with H&M. They're really starting to move in to some of those fast fashion environments. We need them to scale. They're raising money. If you're an investor, you know where to find them. Meanwhile, Colorifix, hand up. Colorifix in the room. If you haven't seen their work downstairs, they're doing incredible stuff with a particular pain point in the fashion industry, which we all know, which is the chemicals that we use to dye our products, the wastewater impact it has. I won't go on about it. You know what it is. They're doing incredible pioneering work, minimizing water usage, eliminating toxic chemicals, reducing carbon emissions, and bringing to the market amazing dyes, pushing each time with their innovations. What is not to love? Why aren't they already at scale? They're also in a round. Help them, support them, and that's going to be one of my calls to action. And then finally, another one in fashion that I love called Fool, not F-O-O-L, but P-H-O-O-L. I wouldn't have done that as a brand name myself, but, our finalists don't always listen to me on these things. They're turning temple waste flowers in India into eco-friendly materials that can be used in fashion as well. There are hundreds and thousands. These guys are emblematic of the work of so many of you in the room and hundreds of other startups out there. But our work doesn't end with just recognition and spotlighting at the award show that happens every year. It is a good show, and it's deliberately meant to break through into the narrative of culture. We're also becoming a Google search engine of environmental solutions. We now have gone from a data puddle to a data swimming pool of solutions that we have compiled over the years. How can we use that as a public good? How can we start to showcase the entire portfolio of solutions to more investors, more governments, more media organizations? We wrap a fellowship program around our top 15 finalists to give them the support they need. And we've built a matchmaking platform to connect solutions from our portfolio of finalists and nominees with mission-aligned blended capital, investors and donors of all kinds. It's called the Launchpad, and it's just out now. And we also have been building a global alliance of partners because at the end of the day, for a startup or a small solution, sometimes it's the corporate contract that is the pathway to scale. It's the test prototype. It's the innovation team in a corporation saying, let's dig in with you and help you get to that next level of scale. And that makes you then investor ready for those next round of investors. Or it might be the donor who says, I'm going to de-risk that first bit of your work and help invest without diluting equity so that you can get to that place where you can bring the mainstream investors on. Our Global Alliance also give free support. We have law firms that are helping deal with all the legalities and tax and IP. These are the things that in big corporations you take for granted. But I know that so many of you in a startup, you're like that. You know, I came in because I'm a great designer. Like, what do I know about IP? Trust me, I understand that very well. And so we are here to support this ecosystem and this movement of innovators to succeed. And we do that also by spotlighting. So we are storytellers. How do we get out of the old environmental narrative where we have all of us, self included, led with logic and science, which doesn't make your heart beat very hard if you're not a scientist or an environmentalist. We have to break out of our bubble, and we have to spark the world's imagination that the possible can become the new normal, and that everybody can play a role in making that happen. So yes, we're a prize, but we're also a platform for impact, and we are increasingly seeking to be a movement to inspire urgent optimism and change. So in the spirit of that, I want to end with 2 calls to action. To any corporate investor, donor, anyone with money, anyone with power or procurement or running a team that could help, we have to speed to scale. We need to break through this valley of death that we all see so many of the fashion-based innovators sitting in, really scrambling to try to get through from being that cute prototype to being that scaled replacement of entire material sets, as an example. I am so tired of watching amazing startups in the fashion world go bust and hit the wall. We have a capital issue. We know that the margins are really tight. We understand the timelines. We understand the subcontract. I understand the subcontract factory issue. I understand what it takes to put CapEx into things. We've got to stop seeing this as a competitive first-to-market issue. We need brands and banks and every investor. We need you to collaborate and come together and crowd in and decide that you're going to give these proven startup and solutions the chance to scale. And you cannot do it on your own. 20 years ago, we challenged the industry at Nike that compliance in supply chains was a non-competitive issue, and that we needed to create collaborative approaches to supply chain compliance. We were all in the same factories, and we were all building our own little codes of conduct, and we were all sending in monitoring teams, and the factories were like, dudes, you're driving us crazy. And by the way, you're only 10% of my entire line, so I'm not going to listen to you, even if you are Nike. But if you're going to come together with one code of conduct and a joint approach, now I have to listen to you. You've just moved the industry. We need to do this again when it comes to materials and how we think about sustainability. We just stop competing, please. The whole, I'm going to walk down the line with my new material, but I'm not going to share it with everyone else. If you can't fund it to scale, collaborate to get that thing to scale. So that's my rather punchy, please change behaviors. And to those of you that are working in startups, know this, you are not alone. And on those days when it feels hard, you have a team in the Earthshot Prize that wants you to win. You have our founder, the Prince of Wales, who wants you to win. And we will do everything we can to help you win. Thank you so much.
This is the Earthshot Prize.
There is no challenge bigger than the battle against climate change.
Where it won't just take our global collective will, it will also take innovation.
Welcome to the Earthshot Prize here in London. Tonight, we're turning the capital and hopefully the world green.
Winning this prize is recognition that we are going in the right direction.
Welcome to Boston and the Earthshot Prize.
The Prince of Wales has awarded his Earthshot Prize.
The prize money, £1 million each, to take their projects further.
This is the greatest crisis that we are facing in our lifetime. welcome to the Earthshot Prize 2023.
Let's get going with the first award, shall we?
The Earthshot Prize goes to Axion Andina.
GRST.
Goes to S for S Technologies.
Umitra.
Wild Aid Marine Program.
It's my hope the Earthshot legacy will continue to grow, which is why we must choose the path of hope, optimism, and urgency to repair our planet.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that inspiring speech. We love being partners of the Earthshot Prize and really support the incredible work that you and the team are doing. So thank you. So for our first panel of the day, Disrupting Climate Change, Decarbonising Fashion, I'd like to introduce on stage Bel Jacobs, Unspun and PACT alongside Kering Material Innovation Lab to explore the role of both brands and startups in revolutionising the industry's approach to carbon emissions reduction.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the first panel. We're running quickly, so I'll just introduce phenomenal speakers today. Jess Zhu is commercial lead for Unspun, a fashion tech B Corp that has invented Vega TM, the world's first 3D weaving technology for apparel. Unspun aims to streamline and localize fashion supply chains by setting up 3D weaving powered micro factories. Dr. Yudi Ding in the middle is co-founder and CEO of PACT, P-A-C-T, a biomaterials startup designing elegant materials made in harmony with planet Earth. PACT's first material is Oval, a collagen-derived plastic-free biomaterial which offers designers unparalleled flexibility at minimal cost to the environment. And we have Riccardo Turrisi, Sustainable Innovation Manager at Kering, where his Materials Innovation Lab, where his role within the Innovation Lab team is to find, pilot and sustain new technologies to be implemented within the textile space, with the overall objective to lower the global impact of the luxury industry. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. The first question really is to Jess. Can you talk about how Unspun works with brands, particularly in regard to implementation and challenges, also bringing in ideas of material sustainability, innovation, and teams?
Thank you so much, Bel, for the wonderful introduction, and very happy to be here today with my fellow panelists. So Unspun, we invented the world's 3D weaving technology for fashion, like Bel mentioned, called Vega. And what Vega does is a number of things. So in the technicality of it is we take essentially yarn and weave them directly into garments. And what that helps do is it first helps shorten and collapse the supply chain into one step. It's highly efficient, meaning that you're able to go, so for us, from yarn to garment at scale, we expect about 20 minutes. And that kind of efficiency and automation then lets brands actually onshore their manufacturing and do a kind of local for local production model that is traditionally has been very hard economically for areas like Europe and North America. Also, by going from yarn to garment, you're also saving a lot of the industrial textile waste that comes with patterning on 2D fabric, cutting and then sewing that into 3D. And because of that efficiency and producing onshore, you're also able to move towards low inventory or even on-demand manufacturing, which means that you're eliminating the need for inventory. And with that, you're also eliminating dead stock, which is a huge issue in the industry. So the way that we work with brands is we want to help brands move towards this model. So Unspun is essentially providing this platform where brands can use to create on-demand manufacturing models. So we provide the technology. We also provide the software that powers this entire supply chain from when a customer clicks buy on a website or goes into a store. And we also have kind of a fit software that helps someone find their perfect fit or the right size within the existing assortment, and then all the way to producing that garment on demand on the 3D weaving technology. So the way that we collaborate with brands, similar to many innovations, is we go to the brands first. We need to create that pull and that demand within the market for the technology itself. And then similar to also other innovators, we slot somewhere in the supply chain. So there's that three-way partnership where we need to work with, in our case, garment manufacturers to implement our technology in their space to then produce the garments for brands. So in terms of challenges and also opportunities with our technology, so it's a huge supply chain play. You're essentially changing the business model, which was mentioned just now in the keynote, which is really key. And we need to think about how do we drastically change things and how do we actually disrupt instead of just doing less bad, but actually moving towards a great model. A challenge that we faced, and it's completely understandable coming from an industry that hasn't changed for many years or many decades or even centuries, is that we see a bit of, clients, whether it's brands or manufacturers, wanting to see kind of innovation somewhat served on a silver platter where it's near perfect, and it's really not conducive to bringing that level of scale, because for us to get to that level, we need the industry to meet us a little bit before then and help us push towards that level. And what that looks like is in many ways. The first part, I'm sure many innovators in the room are familiar with, having codified long-term demand. So can you put on paper what is the long-term demand that I'm willing to commit to if everything goes well in the scaling path, so that I give you a reason to scale, I give you a reason to put your time and resources. I also make your company fundable so that you can get to that level and get to that level of scale. Another way is, can this become, once the concept has been proven out, once the nice pilot is done, can it become a top-down mandate to actually implement this innovation instead of it living with a small team at a company and risking the project dying whenever there's a leadership change? So there's many different challenges, and I think we've been very lucky. I think in this room, many innovators, including us, work with a lot of brands that are fortunately on that, changing their mindset and recognizing the challenges and the opportunities and the need to meet us in the middle. So wanting to see more of that from the industry.
Fantastic. Yeah, you've sort of, it really requires a cultural shift, doesn't it? And this idea that Hannah brought up of radical collaboration and the sense that you're working together towards solution rather than you're just providing a service. Thank you so much, Jess. Yudi, we know the impact that traditional materials have on carbon emissions and biodiversity loss and much more. So I really, really do want to hear about Oval and its potential for addressing all of these issues.
Sure, thank you. Great to be here today as well. So Oval is a collagen-based material, and we're sourcing collagen from the industry byproducts or waste that will go to landfill or very low value-adding products. So we work with our supply partners to identify where are those low cost, low environmental impact collagen is coming from, and then we skim through different ways of type of collagen, including bovine collagen, ovine collagen, and fish collagen, and we found that sustainable aquaculture provide the lowest carbon footprint, water consumption, land use for producing the collagen. The reason why we're focused on collagen is because it's the key building block for our own skin and for traditional material like leather. And we want to leverage its abundancy, this this structured protein that can build a robust material. And then apart from all these environmental impact that overall coming from the waste stream, we measure our impact the similar way that this event was looking at the impact of the startups, the 6 different areas, starting from, for example, the carbon emission. We just completed our LCA preliminary LCA internally. Our carbon footprint, depending on the customization of the material, is between 3 to 5 kilo of carbon equivalent. Compared to leather or traditional materials, it will be more than 100. So that's a 10-time reduction at least. And then the second area we're looking at is water consumption. So our manufacturing method is very efficient, and we don't require intensive, soaking or dyeing of the material, and the pigment and dye can incorporate directly in the manufacturing process. And the water consumption used is 20 times less as well. And third of all, it's the land use. So I have the data here, 1 kilo of aquaculture of fish is 8.4 square meter of land use, as compared to beef herding, it's 326 per square meter. So that's really huge as well. And then the water consumption is 0.1. Finally, the microplastic is because we're plastic-free collagen skin, and therefore eliminate the use of that. We don't need any binders for the material. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I love that. Collagen is kind of the stuff of all life, isn't it? Really. But listening to you just then, it did make me think: how do you translate sometimes really difficult scientific concepts to people who aren't familiar with them?
I think collagen itself as a protein is quite a familiar protein in all of the other, chemicals, because it's built our skin, it's used in cosmetics, in beauty, also in, pharmaceutical, for example. So we sort of have this affinity to this protein that, your daily life we're encountering them. So I think that's also one of the benefits of our solution, is that the consumers, when they hear about collagen, it feels like it's something that they can trust, that they know about. So there's a level of marketing that we can lean towards.
That's quite convenient, actually. Riccardo, a year ago, Kering announced a new sustainability target to reduce the group's total environmental footprint, or absolute greenhouse gas emissions, by 40% by 2035 across its own operations and the entire supply chain. Really ambitious. How does the work of your Materials Innovation Lab play into this? Quite substantially, I imagine.
Well, I mean, I think there is a twofold answer to this. I think the first, it's important to understand how Kering as a group aims at actually, tackling this huge problem, like 40% reduction in absolute terms is quite a lot. So the approach is going to be threefold in three directions. One is towards materials, of course, materials and processes associated, so raw materials in general. One is going to be towards the logistics, so transportation, and the other one is going to be towards production, right? Because at the end, the biggest issue is that we probably produce too much. So reducing that and at the same time increasing the value of the product that the group is going and be willing to push out onto the markets, it's going to be one of the main, let's say, ways that we want to tackle the challenge, right? Under the point of view of the Material Innovation Laboratory, what we try to do is, and this has been funded like 10 years ago, in 2013, and during these 10 years, the role of the Material Innovation Lab has evolved a lot. In the beginning, it was mainly a library that brands inside of the group could, come and visit and see what were the most interesting and new materials to, tackle. And this has evolved a lot together with the shifting in the plans of the group, where we basically said, okay, well, Material Innovation Laboratory, which mainly deals with textiles, so no leather, no alternative to leathers that is a part of someone else, another team within the group. But in general, what we try to do is we try to take these innovations which are out there, and hearing Anna's speech earlier on, it was more like Churchill than Kennedy as a speech, but still, I really appreciated the fervor, let's say. But it's challenging, right? And you're totally right, because you need to bring something which is very small, bring it up to scale in a time frame, which at the same time makes sure that the planet doesn't burn. So in the meantime. So the idea is that the Material Innovation Laboratory has 3 main pillars of action, and 3 comes a lot in what we try to do, is because it's easy to remember, but the idea is that we act on the sustainable materials side. There has been a huge push by the Kering group to create the Kering Fund for Nature, which is basically the possibility of having 1 million hectares of land, which is now used for the production of our raw materials, converted into regenerative materials. And this, ranges from cashmere to cotton to all of the materials that we obviously use. This is one, together with the traceability aspect of this, because you need to prove that what is made in South Gobi actually is what then you use within the supply chain and then in your products. The second pillar is about innovating the sourcing scenarios, and Anna again comes to mind, because the idea is that what we're trying to do now, it sometimes has a lot of intermediaries, and there are barriers in there that are very hard to pass and to break in, to make sure that these materials are, at a scale being used within the supply chain. And this is, second pillar in which we try to work on. And the third pillar is like responsible innovation. So finding new startups, as Jess was saying earlier on, both on the materials and the process side, making sure that these materials and processes are brought together in the supply chain, so that basically we try to interact with brands within the group, with innovators, and with suppliers which are already within our supply chain. And what we try to do is create triangulations or quadriangulation, I don't know if you want to add another point to that, where we try to, provide feedback and at the same time make sure that the product and the technology is brought up to spec to what the luxury market is actually expecting. Because of course we are in that valley where we need to push out great products, because that's our whole heritage and what the group wants to do. But at the same time, the technology we need to accompany and make sure that these materials are up to spec with what our requirements are. So, the Material Innovation Lab tries to put all of these things together, and most of the people in this room actually, they are collaborators, and it's a great honor to be working with them, because, great minds, and it's actually so energizing to see their innovative mindsets and being able to be put into a productive environment and helping them in scaling up and be the impactful innovations that we know that they can be. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, a theme that's coming out really of the event so far is really this idea of collaboration, conversation, working together. This question here, and I think, Jess, you really did talk about it a bit, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists. How do brands determine the criteria for adopting innovative materials?
So it's actually, let's say that the Material Innovation Laboratory in general has like 6 different areas of interest. We range from upcycling and circularity, dyeing, eco-finishing, smart processes. We have new materials in there, and then the traceability. These are the 6 areas of innovation that are part of the scope of the MIL, Material Innovation Laboratory. And the idea is that, as I was saying, TRL, so the technological readiness level, is not particularly important. It really depends. I mean, the involvement of the Material Innovation Laboratory changes with the TRL of the technology that we're trying to move forward. The important thing is that there is a willingness to collaborate, to make sure that you need to be not averse to critics, of course, and to feedbacks, because the idea is that there is bound to be a certain level of working together and partnership in order for the material to be used within the luxury sector. So there is going to be back and forth. Some collaborations we have span like multiple years, 3 to 5 years, depending on the technology, to make sure that a new material is brought into a collection. The idea of the Material Innovation Laboratory is of support to the brand, which are part of the group, to make sure that these technologies are tested. The Material Innovation Laboratory is, let's say, in a time capsule outside of the loop of the collections of the different brands, and that's why it's of use to the brands, because basically we have the chance, privilege, to be working on a longer time scale that is not within the same cycle of the collections of the brands. So we can basically pilot, test out, to make sure the technology is good enough for application, and then, talk to the brand, say, hey, this is what we have done with this great innovator. And of course, then there is, a feedback loop again. This is too red, make it a little bit less red. Of course, but this is like simplifying, but of course it needs to adhere to the creative direction of the brands, right? So, it's a feedback loop that we try to feed into as the Material Innovation Laboratory.
One thing I'll just add to that, and I really appreciated how Riccardo said, we'll change the requirements depending on material readiness, and we'll work together to figure out what the final quality should be and how it should hit the standards that the brand is expecting. I think one thing that's really important when thinking about what criteria to put around adopting new innovations is a mentality of not trying to fit the existing mold, because inherently you're working with a new material, you're working with a new process. Is it fair to put these new materials or processes under the exact same scrutiny and evaluation criteria than what currently exists? Can you look at it as a new innovation? Can you try to highlight what this innovation does better that the traditional material or process couldn't do, and try to highlight that and find a way to, go for the low-hanging fruits and value progress over perfection?
Yeah, I second that as well, because for our material oval, a lot of people consider us leather alternative, but we really don't want to be called a leather alternative, because we can do so much more than looking like leather material. We can do, very similar to a lot of textile can do, and the design aspect is really important for us as well. On your question on what's the brand require from the innovators, I think it's break down into 3 main criteria, and on top of all, it's the sustainability, right? And then the first criteria, I'd say, from the luxury perspective, is the aesthetics and desirability. They would not want to adopt a new material just for the sake of sustainability. It needs to be desirable, it needs to be beautiful, and for whoever touched the material and feel the final product of the brand, they feel this is a luxurious material, it's durable, it's desirable. So that's the reason why we've really focused on how to create this white canvas for the designers and the creative directions to paint on top on whatever they want to want the material to be. So that compatibility with the existing supply chain partners who offer that level of customization is crucial for the luxury partners. That's the first one. The second one is the durability and the performance of the material. Although we're a new material oval, they don't know what to do with it, so they test with the leather standard, they test with the textile standard as well. So, it's sort of add an extra layer of, complexity in the collaboration, but at the same time that we cannot, sort of like lower the standards of what we can offer to the brand. If it doesn't last as long as the traditional material, then it sort of damages the image of the brand, especially in the luxury space. This timeless design and, high quality is also part of their DNA, and we need to listen to them and offer the material that can meet those requirements. And I'm also happy to share that our material has worked with many luxury groups and brands in the past, at least 5 standards from those tanneries or the mills that they're working with. Finally is the scale up. This is something that is, it says finally, but it's maybe one of the most important, like what Hannah said as well. Like, if we can offer a material that only exists in the lab, people can, touch it, do something with it, but if, they cannot launch it to the commercial, the customers at a reasonable scale, then, well, whatever we're doing is just having some fun. we're not realizing the potential of reducing the environmental impact of the materials, and that's the reason why for us is to adopting be a drop-in solution for the existing supply chain partners that already supply millions of square meters of material to the brand we're working with, and be able to be compatible with that process is also very important for us to scale up and reduce the cost.
Thank you.
If I might add a little thing to that, I mean, both what Jess was saying earlier on is very important, but in general, one of the things that we try to measure, Kering has this EPNL tool, the two tools that basically we try to use to measure the sustainability of the group in general. The EPNL is the environmental profit and loss. So basically, to each one of the materials that we use, and logistics and anything that actually is part of the group, we have a multiplier for that measures the impact of those operations within the supply chain and outside of the supply chain of the group. So the idea is that new processes and new materials that then are sold, each one of them has a multiplier that identifies the sustainability, the improved sustainability of each one of these, so that we make sure that a new technology that is brought within the company is not just because it's a very cool, technological, smart, web-driven IoT. I mean, it's not something that we really care about, right? We really are focused on the sustainability aspect of that. And the way we measure this is through these multipliers, which of course are driven by LCAs. And this raises an interesting point, because LCAs at the same time are like tools, interesting tools, that at the same time are not particularly useful to measure impacts of companies which are still growing. So if you're a small company, your LCA, your impact is going to be incredibly bigger than what eventually happens when you're at scale. So that's a challenge that we need to face and we need to somehow solve.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was really the last question. I think to round up, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that actually there's a lot of work towards mimicry of traditional materials, and actually maybe we should just celebrate these amazing new materials that are coming out and see what can be designed just from looking at them. I was also thinking about speed, but I won't bring that up. I'd really, really like to return to Hannah's words at the end of this first panel to talk about the benefit of the clear aim, to talk about the benefit of radical collaboration. One thing I'm very grateful for in this talk is the clear description of the landscape within which we operate, which is an emergency. You know, we've been very clear on the science that we need to act fast, and the awareness of that emergency will make the take-up of the solutions available here today even faster as they need to be. So thank you, everyone.
So next up, we have Closing the Loop on Plastics with Solena Materials, Nanoloom, Spintex, Epoch Biodesign, facilitated by Jim Pickles. And this conversation will deep dive into the transition away from plastics and the rise of alternative next-gen materials.
Thanks, everybody. Great to be here this morning, and thank you for the invite to chair this panel. I'm Jim Pickles from Innovate UK, business growth in the London region. I have a fashion background as well, so moving from fashion into innovation support, very relevant for today, and growth and scale are two topics which have come up already, and those are elements we can help you with. And if you will allow me just a minute to say that we support Innovate UK through innovation funding and finance, accessing those grants and accessing investment support, as well as internationalization. So if any small businesses, startups, innovators in the room are not already in touch with us, I know several of you are. I recognise some of the faces here today. Either have a quick word with myself over lunch, or my colleague Nick Cliff, who is an absolute specialist in the alternative plastics area and has led many projects. So just to move on to today's panellists, I'm delighted to be here with James, Victoria, Alex and Charlotte, and tackling the problem of closing the loop on plastics. Let me just start, if I may, with a very, very brief quote before I hand over to them to showcase their innovations. But as we know, there are over 14 million tons of plastics in our oceans, And microplastics have been found in our natural environments, food systems, and now even our brains. It's estimated that over 85% of the microplastics found in our oceans comes from textiles used in fashion. Probably facts that many of us in the room already know, but how can we decrease our dependency on plastics? And to kick off today, I'd just like to allow each panelist to introduce themselves, talk about their innovation and how that is helping to reduce dependency on plastics. Victoria, could I start with you, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm the co-founder of Nanoloom, and I think while we hit a lot of targets, microplastics is really where we started. My co-founder was doing some research into basically the effects that they're starting to have in human cardiovascular issues now, the increased transference from things like fish into humans. And that was really what drove Nanoloom to start as a company. And behind it all was an innovation that was originally built for use in people. So it's already gone to patients for use in accelerated wound healing patches with stem cells, and it's now at preclinical stage for nerve regeneration. So it's been built entirely to be safely biodegradable in the human body with no shedding. Which is a problem, which is obviously a massive problem if you've got something implanted in you that starts shedding microplastics. So what makes this possible is very quickly graphene nanomaterials. So graphene is essentially a 2D layer of carbon, and if you had a sheet the thickness of cling film or saran wrap, you would need an elephant's weight to break it. So it has huge potential, and we can also turn carbon emissions into graphene, but to use it, you need quite a bit of expertise, and we've managed to turn it into yarns that are knittable, weavable, slot into existing supply chains. And the real demands that we've heard is for an elastane replacement, which seems to be an incredibly difficult thing to replace to something that's cleaner, which is our initial focus. And yeah, that's my intro.
Thank you very much. Thank you. James.
Hi, so Solena Materials. So we started 2 years ago. We're a spin out from Imperial College, and we develop textile fibers using computational protein design. So we have now a lab of 12 full-time people. We started 2 years ago, as I said, and we're now rapidly expanding to scale up the proteins. So we're quite unique in the protein space because we design the proteins from scratch rather than taking natural sequences from nature. And the reason for doing that is because natural proteins tend to be adapted for their natural host environments, and they're not really adapted for human use cases and human manufacturing processes. So we find by designing from scratch, we can produce material that's inherently more scalable, produces better performance, so we can get better performance than reproducing recombinant versions of natural proteins. And we can also customize them for particular applications. So we can design the proteins at a molecular level and embed, design particular performance characteristics, and also embed functionality into those designs.
Thank you, James. Alex.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Alex Greenhalgh. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Spintex. At Spintex, we really look to nature for inspiration in how we make our textiles. So we look towards what we consider the gold standard of textile production, which is the spider. So although we're not spinning spider silk, you definitely, if you want to get something close to a spider silk, you need to take the inspiration from the original creator. So we spin proteins as well. We generate a feedstock that is from an insect-derived protein, and that feedstock shares many of the properties that we see inside the spider, so it will transform into a solid just through the application of physical force. So you can essentially pull this feedstock and generate a fiber, a process called pultrusion, which is exactly what happens inside the spider. And what's really interesting about the process, and not just the material itself, is just how energy efficient this is as a way to make textiles. So plastics, for all the many issues they do have one really good benefit, which is they're very energy efficient to make compared to nearly any other textile. Proteins are really great in terms of biodegradability, in terms of comfort, but they take a lot of energy to make. You know, the energy to create wool, to create silk, to create cashmere is the major down problem. And one of the main reasons why we can't really use proteins as a sustainable material unless we address that energy requirement. And what we see inside the spider is that the fibrillation to make the fiber that they do uses 1,000 times less energy than plastic fiber spinning. So already one of the most efficient ways to make a textile we can do, the spider is beating it by 1,000-fold. So by replicating that, we've got an incredibly low energy way to make our protein fibers. And at the same time, because we're mimicking this kind of gold standard, we get really high performance. So we can match the properties that we would see in something like silk, but we can adjust the parameters to get all types of different fibers and actually different types of materials from our feedstock. So we can match things like wool, cashmere, and provide high performance, good quality protein fibers that don't come with the energy costs that we see with the kind of naturally derived proteins.
Thanks, Alex. Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Charlotte Gruender, Business Development Manager at Epoch Biodesign. We are an enzymatic recycling company founded in 2019 by our founder, Jacob Nathan, built on some original research during a high school project, actually, and through work with some scientists, built our underlying enzyme engineering platform. This has gone on to enable us to launch our first product, which is for complex blended nylon material recycling. So these are materials that are traditionally designed for high performance requirements. They tend to be blended with a number of different materials, whether that's high percentages of elastane for sportswear, silicon coated, glass fiber reinforced, and so forth. So we have developed a process underpinned by our enzyme recycling in the center that enables us to take these blended materials and recycle the nylon-rich fraction of that into the chemical building blocks that make the polymer. We purify these, and these are chemically identical to the building blocks that are used to make virgin-based nylon today. So these are drop-in replacements for existing supply chains that can be used for new products over and over again.
Thank you very much. What fantastic innovations you're all working on, and perhaps coming to a pertinent question for a lot of the brands and retailers perhaps in the room today. James, if I could ask, how are you finding collaboration and adoption of your technology by brands within the industry so far?
So actually our collaboration with fashion brands predated the formation of Solena Materials. So I was at Imperial College as a research fellow, and we developed this fiber technology. And we actually we signed a contract with a fashion brand while at Imperial. So that was kind of a small contract, small 1-year contract, proof of concept. And then when we spun out Imperial, we managed to persuade, so that contract gave the brand a option on exclusivity on the technology. But when we spun out, we managed to persuade the brand to exchange that exclusivity option for a small equity stake in the company. And we then spun out the company and then and then we signed a new joint development contract with the same brand, which was quite significant revenue. And that was very good to attract additional equity investment from investors. So we found it very helpful working with fashion brands, and also they provide access to their supply chain, so we can talk to their supply chain partners, which is very helpful, particularly on the spinning side, and potentially also they have contacts with investors and a whole bunch of other people. So we found it very helpful.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Charlotte. Coming back to you, how about you? How have you found collaboration with brands?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of success as well. The way we work with brands is twofold. We offer a solution for end-of-life products, but we also offer a solution for recycled input. And so we work again on short-sale projects to test materials, show the viability of their specific materials, the dyes, the additives, and so forth that are used in that through our process. And then we can work with them to scale this up and include this as a new polymer nylon in their existing materials. So whilst we can't disclose a number of brands at the moment, we found that with working with them, not only is it beneficial to robustly test the feedstock as we go to build a post-consumer collection kind of ecosystem in the coming years, we also unlock their supply chain, which is crucial as we go to work with manufacturers across the globe to be able to drop these recycled monomers back into existing product manufacture.
Thank you. Victoria, where do you see the greatest opportunities for your material in the fashion space?
So for us, I know I said elastane is our first focus, but we could virtually replace every traditional synthetic. When you think about the quantities you need to replace even one, that's why we're focusing on one. And we see it very much across the spectrum. So we will have brands that are interested in it for performance sportswear, brands that are interested in it for luxury, but we've made sure to make it cost competitive as well and carbon efficient and a big reduction on elastane so that it can also be used in places like fast fashion where the biggest problem is. So, like what James was saying about exclusivity, we definitely avoid that wherever we can. And ultimately, I think we try and drive brands into the direction of having an openness to exploring different applications for this across different types of garments.
Great, thank you. Alex, going back to you there, I think you may have touched on this slightly in your intro, but where are you looking for in the future with collaborations and brands?
In the future for collaboration, I mean, the kind of starting point with collaboration is obviously super important for companies in this space. You need that initial kind of contact. You need that feedback on your material as well. I know with some of the brands we've worked with, the material we produce now is substantially better than what we produced at the start, directly based on that feedback. As you move forward, you do need to start moving into more of that kind of supplier position, particularly for certain kind of investments. They're going to want to see that kind of route to commercialization, because that's always one of the hardest things for any new material. Alongside your scaling is, are you actually going to be able to sell it? Is there enough interest to make it, revenue generating to the point where it will be eventually profit driven? And that can be difficult because there's a lot of steps that you have to go through with brands in terms of their R&D teams, their innovation teams. You have to tick all of the check boxes whilst at the same time scaling to actually provide what they are long-term going to want, which may be hundreds, if not thousands of times greater than what you can do right now. So I think getting that early relationship with the brands and kind of maintaining that relationship through the whole process, that's really what you need to kind of focus on.
Okay, thank you. And sort of progressing that theme a little bit further, Victoria, what advice would you have for brands and manufacturers who are considering adopting and trialing technologies like yours alongside or within their current production?
Yeah, and I think the previous panelists did a really good job at explaining some of those things, so I won't repeat those, but I will say in particular that as innovators, we work really hard to make sure our materials can slot into existing infrastructure at mills, with weaving, with knitting, with blending. And we need the brand to meet us halfway, so we actually spend a lot on equipment that can, for example, blend yarns at a small scale, because to do one sample with a mill, they will need 20 kilograms or something, which is not just wasteful, but quite difficult when you're at a smaller scale to produce. And if brands and mills could put some of that forward, that would accelerate the process much farther. At the moment, we're working with some incredible brands, but it is still very much on us to get it to that point where we're like, look how it weaves perfectly, look how it knits perfectly. We can blend it with all of these things, but we've had to do that on our own, and we've obviously had a lot of support from investors and Innovate UK, which made that possible. But I know, even speaking to some of my fellow innovators, they don't have access to some of this equipment, and it sort of can block some of the progression they're trying to make. So having essentially like R&D facilities to be able to do that would be immensely helpful for us.
Thanks for the little plug there, and maybe Nick and I can take that away.
It's so we can get some more money.
I'll try my best. Charlotte, I know you've swapped in kind of late in the day for Nathan, and Nathan identified this question, so as one that he would like to answer, so I hope you can too. But what do you think could be done in terms of regulatory change to support brands and consumers moving forwards towards adoption of your technologies?
I'm going to assume you heard some of that. I'm focusing on the need for support for the post-consumer sorting and collection as well, the need for feedstock for technology such as ourselves.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel have a comment about what could be done in terms of regulatory change? Pass the mic.
Well, I think so. The main thing for Solena is, because we have a novel protein, we have to do extra testing to test for ecotox testing, so it doesn't cause any problems with other life. So we started doing that already. So we've seen no sign of any ecotoxicity from our proteins. We've also never noticed any problems with immune reactions or anything like that. So I think. But we'll have to comply with REACH regulations and those kind of things eventually once we reach the 1 ton scale of production. So we've already started on that path.
Is that your magic number, the 1 ton?
I think that's when the regulations kick in.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here? So on the regulatory side, one thing we find is, we've done a lot of certification because the material was developed for medical, so things like non-toxicity and so on. But even something like biodegradability, in California, for example, you can't market something as biodegradable unless it biodegrades fully in 3 months. Most of the standards that you can get your certification to are 6 months. That's not necessarily desirable, especially for large parts of the fashion industry. Ours, we anticipate it to be based on the rate that we've already had in our current biodegradation study. We expect it to be 1 to 2 years, but we can't actually, we're not going to be able to actually say that anywhere. And I think a lot of the new regulations, especially in Europe coming in, are going to put a lot of costs on startups to be able to make certain claims, which we can't afford. And perhaps we're not built in a way that, that sort of facilitate innovation, and we're not built by people that are sort of innovating in this space.
That's a really interesting point as well. It makes me think, when you're thinking about internationalizing and exporting your products as well, do the harmonized tariff codes exist? Do the classification codes exist? I'm guessing they probably don't yet, or they're, you're having to kind of lobby to get those codes now developed.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, shipping anything abroad, even for us, has been incredibly difficult. Like, at every single turn, you have so many issues with customs. It was a little bit easier before a certain thing happened. But essentially, it's a nightmare. I mean, we've had what should have been £20 to ship something turn into £500 because it's got caught in a warehouse and you have to pay warehouse fees. And it's like, these are not small sums when you're a smaller company, and they add up if you're doing it a lot. And how would I move a ton of our material if I'm dealing with this kind of issue? So it's, long term, we've always kind of had a plan in mind to actually set up manufacturing closer to where our kind of customers and interests are, which probably means having something in Europe. I think, there's a point of, we want to see innovation in the UK. We want to see successful companies in the UK. If the environment's not right for that, they're not going to stay. They're going to go to the US. They're going to go to Asia. They're going to go to Europe. So regulatory is going to be super important for the future.
Indeed, regulatory and investment appetite as well. Just been in San Jose with a delegation of companies in the biotech space, and just to see the VC appetite there compared to some of the VC appetite here is quite marked differences. Coming to a question here, perhaps for some of the brands and marketing teams in the room, but what do you think? You've got some very novel materials here. We're talking, spiders, proteins. What could brands think about in terms of marketing strategy for the end consumer? Because ultimately, the end consumer is the one that we are going to have to work on to convince to adopt. How would you market your material?
I think nowadays, probably very honestly, I think there's not a lot of appetite for greenwashing or making big claims that aren't backed up. Wonder materials that never see the light of day because the technology is still 10 years away. So being honest about where it is, what kind of actual impact it can have. Because I think people are getting more savvy, particularly around materials. I see a lot of people who never would have even looked at the material label of their clothing are now basing their buying decision on what it's made of. And they are basing that on whether or not they believe it's a sustainable material. So I think we've seen a big kind of resurgence in linen recently, which I think is personally a great material in a lot of ways. And that's really been driven by that kind of desire to have real fact-based requirements for sustainability in products. So I think just being really honest up front, and I think that goes for the startups as well, because I think there's definitely... in the beginning, there's a lot of claims made, a lot of bold. At some point, you need to back that up. And definitely, history is littered with claims that were never backed up. And I think that kind of hurts trust on both sides. So I think, honesty all around, particularly in these kind of times, is really important to make people actually feel confident in their decision.
Good point. And Charlotte, thinking about the end of life as well and what you do.
Yeah, perhaps I could add to that, based on that trust as well, whilst we're not a new novel material, our technology to recycle an existing material is new. And that also brings a huge education piece from brands, and that's where they can play a role. The differences in recycling open loop versus closed loop. Our recycling offering textile to textile recycling is vastly different from polyester bottles to polyester jumpers and then still to landfill. So there's an education piece on what does recycling mean, for example, that also it sits with the brands.
Thank you. Got a few minutes left, and we've got through the questions. Could I perhaps open it up? Does anyone have a question from the audience for our 4 innovative? Yes.
Victoria, you were talking about biodegradability. I think that you made a great point on the time to biodegradability, but I also think that we need to elevate what actually classifies as biodegradable. Everything is biodegradable, but what does it leave after that? You don't have to answer that question. Anyone else can take it, but I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah, I mean, the way we talk about it, ours is, composting seawater landfill. We're still in the process of doing the external certifications, but we've obviously done a lot of preliminary work as well in-house for the medical side of things, which is what gives us confidence. But I think ultimately, more so than that, recyclability is much more important. And I think that requires a conjunction of innovation. So our materials, for example, chemically recyclable. But if we start our life making an elastane replacement, it's going to be mixed with things. And then it needs an innovation that can separate it, give it back to us, and then we can recycle it. So we can't do everything on our own. But I think recyclability just has so many other benefits in terms of closed loop, reducing how much you're producing, that I think ultimately that should be the focus in any case.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree there that recyclability is probably more important than biodegradability, because to be honest, do we want clothes that can last theoretically for 100 years, or do you want something that's going to fall apart in the wash, after 5 washes? So if you're making something biodegradable, you're going to have a compromise in the performance of the material. So having something that can actually be a lasting piece of the wardrobe, and maybe ties into other innovators who are looking at how things can be not so much recycled, but I guess upcycled into other types of clothing, or different trends can be adjusted into the clothes. Maybe that's a better approach, and then at its very final part of its end of life, having the option to recycle it. That seems better than kind of chucking it in the ground and just going, well, it's fine, it's going to biodegrade. It's still in landfill, it's still a problem. So.
Well, I was just going to say, so on the Solena side, we haven't yet done the formal test to test biodegradability. So we're kind of assuming, because it's a protein material, that it will biodegrade, but we still need to do the tests. But we're planning to do some work on taking fibers we spun and then breaking them back down to produce feedstock for further fermentation to produce new materials. So that's something we're thinking about doing in the near future.
Thank you. Question over there?
Hi. Oh, thank you. Chaos. Hello. Okay, bear with me. You're in a room with every major decision maker in every single luxury house, fashion brand, athleisure, and you have a magic wand that you're going to say one demand and all of them are going to do this. What would that demand be?
You already got it. Put more money into it. Honestly, it's kind of look at it as an investment, look at it as, external R&D for your business, because there has been a certain attitude, and I think it is starting to change, but a certain attitude that private investment money was going to provide the solutions for this space, and brands wouldn't have to get their hands dirty or open their wallet to make it happen. We see private investment, it always follows trends. Sustainability, biomaterials had a huge peak in the kind of 2020 to 2022 and a bit before as well. And now AI is obviously the big kind of thing at the moment, and that will always happen. Investment will go where FOMO is leading them, and that's just a fact of life. So they're not going to be making the calculations based on what the brand's real problems are. They're going to base it on, what their friends are doing and what they think is going to be profitable in the future. If you want the technology that's going to sustain these brands for the next 500 years, you're going to have to put the investment in. I mean, it's important to you. It's maybe not important to, the head of some bank somewhere. So that would be my major demand.
I will absolutely second that, and see scaling our technology as an investment for your purchasing in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. Virgin fossil fuel-based materials are going to be legislated against. The demand for recycled content or other innovative bio-based materials in another 5-10 years' time is going to be through the roof. So get in now, invest now, scale our technologies now, and that will secure your own supply chains and your own products for decades to come.
So I think the issue with the problem we've had is when they put significant amounts of funding into the companies with joint development contracts, they also want exclusivity, even though the funding is nowhere near enough to scale up the materials. So there is a problem there. I'm not quite sure how to solve that.
Demand collaboration. Wave the wand.
Obviously money, but I just wanted to throw in an example. We just finished the Global Change Reward Impact Accelerator with the H&M Foundation, and H&M is a brand that gets a lot of, you've all seen the news, but there is no other foundation linked to a brand that will give startups 200k euros and work with them for 1 year and take them to factories in China, take them to New York, all of this kind of thing. And I think it also separates from the commercial imperatives of the brand. They have a specific foundation trying to bring these innovations to market. It's by far the best accelerator we've done, and it's absolutely elevated us. And I think if there was a possibility for more brands, perhaps instead of having just corporate venture arms that also flow with, whether they invest in materials or not is dependent on the market sentiment. So something like that, I don't know how feasible that is. I'm saying that as a startup innovator asking for money, but I think we've definitely seen how effective that's been, and if that was more of a possibility, that would be amazing.
Thank you all very much for a fascinating panel, and I encourage you all to meet with the brands who are exhibiting here and network with them and hear more from their stories. Thank you very much.
Our next panel will be Creative Chemistry, Rethinking Dyes. So I'd like to introduce on stage Colorifix, Albini Group, Octarine Bio, and Giorgia Parker to moderate.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're in that post-lunch slump, so I hope you had a bit of coffee as well to keep you going. The next session dives into the colourful world of bio-based dyes. I am Giorgia, the Innovation Director at Fashion for Good, leading all of our validation work. So all of our consortium projects and pilots, our innovation programme and alumni network. I'm pleased to welcome 3 amazing panelists to the stage today. I have Orr, CEO of Colorifix, Nethaji, CEO of Octarine Bio, and Giorgia, another fellow Giorgia, best name, Innovation Manager leading Albini Next. So they can tell you much better than I can what their companies do. So I'm going to hand over to them to give you a one-sentence overview of what their company does. So Orr, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Yarkoni. I'm CEO for Colorifix. We developed a new way of dyeing fabrics using microorganisms. We engineer the microbes to produce, deposit, and fix dyes directly onto the textile, leading to savings not just in how the dyes are made, but in the application of them to textiles as well.
Fabulous. Giorgia?
Okay, nice to meet you. I'm Giorgia. I'm from Italy. I work in Albini Group, that is an Italian company, an historical company producing fabrics for shirting. In 2019, they decided to found Albini Next, that is our innovation hub, and we work to introduce sustainable innovation in all our supply chain, because we can work from the cotton seed to the final product that for us is the fabric. So we can, for example, work with growers around the world to, for example, introduce more sustainable agricultural practices. We can work in the dyeing phase, in the spinning phase, in the weaving phase, and in the finished fabric.
Fabulous. And finally, Nethaji.
We are Octarine Bio. We are a Danish synthetic biology platform developing color solutions to fashion and textile industry. We are not a single color company. We have the whole color palette. You can see it downstairs. And we produce colors through fermentation. These colors are produced as liquid dyes or powder dyes that can directly plug into infrastructure of the dye houses. Our colors are natural colors, dye both synthetic and natural fibers. Great to be here.
Albini and Colorifix have been working together for a while now. How did the collaboration start, and what's the secret recipe for a successful partnership?
Should I start?
Okay. We started to collaborate in 2020 because as Albini we work with innovators that for us could be, for example, a startup, a university or a research centers where we find, for example, a new research that we can then transform into an industrial product or process. And in this case, we have decided to map all the microorganisms that we can use to dye the yarns, for example, because we in our dye mill, we dye yarns. So we map all the technologies that we can use, and one of the best solution for us is Colorifix. So we have decided to work together to collaborate. Also, at the beginning, in triangulation with the Material Innovation Lab of Kering, that decided to finance the first part of the project, because normally we work also in triangulation, as Riccardo said. So with an innovator, we are the manufacturer and then the brand that finance the pilot project.
Great summary. I mean, as you said, we started off by meeting Kering and understanding where they work and where we could plug in. Out of the options given, Albini definitely proved to be the best partner, the quality of the fabrics, material, and the dedication to sustainability. It was all very new for us. Albini was actually our third customer for onboarding, and it was the first one in yarn. We didn't have a lot of know-how in yarn. We focused a lot on fabric to begin with, and we started really developing for yarn once we started working with Albini. I'm not going to say it's easy. There's a lot of tech transfer, and we need to be able to offer more products for them and their customers. But it's a case of growing together into this manufacturing space, and I'm glad to see that these things are moving. And in July, we'll hopefully see more movement still.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to say that as Albini, we have decided also to invest buying a fermenter that now we have in our mill, in our dye mill. So we have a fermenter and a biolab where we work with Colorifix to grow the microorganism into a broth that we use in the fermenter and finally in our autoclaves to dye the yarns.
And just to, again, reiterate, they're an excellent partner to work with. So if you're an innovator looking for a good partner, go talk to Giorgia.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go off script and just ask you a follow-up question, Giorgia. What new set of skills did you need to bring into Albini to work a fermenter? That makes me seem like you're like brewing beer. What new set of skills did you have to bring into Albini to be able to use this fermenter?
It's very difficult. At the beginning, we started with Colorifix that help my colleagues to learn how to manage and to grow the microorganism into the biolab. So we did first some weeks with Colorifix to know how to work with microorganism. A lot of people in our company has to learn how to also, for example, work with the fermenter. That is not so easy because there are a lot of things that we have to do to work with the fermenter. And so that's it. It's not so easy, but now we are able to use the fermenter also alone. We are independent, yeah.
Without parental guidance. Okay, Nethaji, from your experience, what do you look for when you're looking for brand and manufacturer partnerships?
Yeah, so the brands are a great way to give a voice to our innovation because they are facing the consumers and, working with very sustainable brands is a real blue stamp for the company. So we're looking for the great brands to collaborate with. But as Octarine vision is to transform this industry, the volumes comes from dye houses across the world. So we are looking at this very top-down. In a way, we develop the innovation. We want to make it easier for the dye houses across the globe to actually implement our technology because, the 8 billion people in the planet need clothing. And the dyeing process is a hot spot for environmental pollution, and we need to change that. And in order to do that and scale it, we really are working with the dye houses. Really, it's like a build, test, evaluate, iterate circle, right? And in order for us to iterate and fine tune, we have to work with the dye houses and collaborate with them at the same time with the brands, because they are the ones at the end selling that luxury product or high volume or middle product. So we need to collaborate with the brand to learn and iterate our process. And earlier you do it, the easier for us to speed up, and we would avoid a lot of the mistake early stage.
So test, evaluate, and iterate are important factors for success. We often hear about pilot fatigue, so many pilots happening in this space, but a lack of implementation. Why do you feel that brands are not moving forward to implementation? I'll start with you, Or.
Well, there's the long answer and the simple answer. The simple answer is price and scale. These innovations are competing with an ultra-mature industry that's been cost optimized for 150 years, right? And you're trying to compete with that off the get-go when you're at zero scale. As an example, we've just reached a scale where we're doing over a ton a week of fabric dyeing, right? Which is great for us. We were doing, maximum 100 kilos a week before, but that's still 0.0000005% of how much is dyed a week. Right, so we're thousands of times under 1%, and in order to actually go into collections and something beyond the capsule, you need to be able to deliver on a scale, right, and at a price that makes sense for the brand and their end customer, because it's very nice to be able to sell a shirt that looks exactly the same, 20 times more expensive, and say it's because it's sustainable, but no one's going to buy it. Right? And that's the truth, and we need to face that. So the biggest challenge is on cost and scale. And then there's maturity, product diversity. We need to be able to offer all of the colors, not just 2 or 3, etc., in order to convince them to bet big on the technology rather than bet small and see, can it work? Right? That's that first step. And then can we sell it is the second one. And for the can we sell it, it's price and scale.
Thanks. And Nethaji, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I echo everything you said, and you guys have been, paving the paths to all the other dye houses like us. And I would say that, even, Colorifix and Octarine become color unicorns. We only take a small fragment of the dye industry. When people ask, are we competitors? No, we are competing with the synthetic dyes who are cheap, who had decades and decades to fine-tune their progress and the way they develop it, and subsidize. They are subsidized again and again, so the price is cheap. And we are competing that, and that's our competition. So yeah, it's a super hardcore, because I'm coming from ingredient industry, bringing ingredients to commercialization. One offtake agreement is enough to make a good business case. Like you sell a favor to Cargill or IFF, you have a great business case. Here in the dye industry, you have to work with multiple dye houses. It's very fragmented. Multiple brands. You're a small company. You're advocating the dye houses, try to make business there. You're advocating the brands, you make business there. And even we have the eyes open to synthetic dye manufacturers, because they can do a big change here.
Yeah, as you said.
Just to jump in on the non-competing thing, absolutely agreed. As I mentioned, we're at 1 ton scale. Even if we get in the next 5 years, 1,000 times greater in scale, we're still dealing with less than 1%, right? So if both of us grow 1,000-fold, we're still dealing with like 2% of the problem. So it's going to be decades before we're actual competitors. And right now, the point is to actually solve the problem, which is the synthetics, and we're in that together.
Well, we obviously at Fashion for Good believe in pre-competitive collaboration, so I love that framing, that supporting each other on this journey as innovators, and actually your competitors being these big dye manufacturers. Giorgia, anything to add on your side?
Yeah, from my side, I can say that first of all, yeah, I agree with the other panelists. The cost is important, is one of the driver, but there are other drivers because, for example, as Albini, first of all, the scale up for us is to transform to drive the innovation from the research into something that could be industrial, and this is the first step. And sometimes here we have brands that decided to finance the pilot project, but the problem is when we scale in the market. So when brands have to use this technology in a large scale, I think that they are scared, for example, because the innovation is a risk. So sometimes when you introduce a new product or a new process, it's difficult for a brand because there could be a risk related, for example, to the quality of the new product, because maybe we can have problem linked to the color fastness and so on. So first of all, the risk. And the second one is that normally in the brands, the style department drives maybe the choice. So sometimes, for example, we have as Colorifix, as with Colorifix, we have two colors now that are industrialized, the violet and the beige. But normally a brand wants another color that now we have no. So it's very difficult to work with them because sustainable innovation is also a trade-off between what we have and what the brands want. So we need to work together and use what we have now to use.
Or did you have anything to add there? Oh, sorry. Looks like you were lifting your microphone, just making sure you safe space to speak. Giorgia, I think you hit the nail on the head, right, around the need for education and the rethinking the way that we create products. And I think Yudi talked about that as well in one of the earlier panels about not wanting to be compared as a leather alternative, right? Like really thinking, what can this material do and where does it make sense? Alex also touched on the boom around investment sort of in 2020, maybe before that and a little bit after. And that seems to have evolved since then, and maybe the appetite isn't as ripe as it once was. How has the industry sentiment towards sustainable innovation changed over the last 12 months? Have you seen that there's a dip in the way that brands want to engage on this topic, or is it still very much front and center? I will start with Nethaji.
That's a very good question, because I would say over the time that the brands are very aware that sustainability has to be part of the business model and the agenda. But I think there is also the sentiment that we feel a lot of brands are waiting to see the technology can be scaled and not as free. Like if you look at 2 years ago, you see a lot of, prototypes coming out. But we also hear if one of these innovators go down, then the brand also get that negative PR that they collaborate with someone and they couldn't scale. I think the brands are afraid of that negative PR, and we see that a little bit of a shift there. But as you heard during the day, that the brands would have to take the risk because they are facing the consumers and the scrutiny of producing these clothing with such a high environmental footprint. So they do have to take the risk and be willing to meet the innovators halfway. I think there are a lot of brands, and there's quite a nice brands in Denmark that leading the path here as well.
So it's again, which part of the brand? Is it the sustainability part? Is it the business part? Because they're different entities within the same brand. And ultimately, you need to make all of them happy for them to bet on it. And that means, as you said, reducing the risk, right? Everybody wants innovation. Nobody really wants to be the first one. Everybody wants to be the second. Nobody wants to be third. Nobody wants to be first, right? They want to see that it works, that somebody else took the risk, and that they can now use it and know that every pound they invest will give a return rather than maybe it won't lead to anything. And that's the reality. As far as the investment community goes, I'd say that it feels about the same as it was in 2020. The biggest difference is these companies are now maturing, seeking larger pots of money, which means different investors, and there's less of those. It's just the way that the food chain goes there. And it is a struggle, and some of them will not get to scale because of that. Funding, not technology, not brand appetite, not anything else. And that's why that shift into getting those pilots, getting to those first collections, and giving more confidence that this is not a high-risk endeavor is going to be key towards keeping the funding going, because there will be lots of failures over the next few years. Investors will look at those and lose faith unless we get some more success stories into the market, which is what the investors will see as lowering risk.
And I think just to build on that, we saw that with some of our innovators in the chemical recycling space with RenewCell, that they said every conversation they had was like, oh, what if what happened to RenewCell happens to you? And they were like, we're such a different company. The way that we, our technology works, our like scale up plans, there's so many factors that go into that. And it really made it difficult because they were being compared to something that had like multiple different factors that had gone into it. And they definitely felt that too. So I echo that. Giorgia?
I think that we can see some changes because, for example, when I started in Albini Next in 2019, at the beginning, we worked only with the Material Innovation Lab, where there was an innovation manager, someone in the brands that know what is innovation. And now I can say that a lot of brands have an innovation manager or someone who can work in innovation. So I think there is a change and brands are interested in working in sustainable innovation. But at the same time, as we said, we need more work together, and we need that innovation becomes also the decision maker sometimes to drive the purchase of the brand.
And I think that was touched upon in one of the earlier panels about it, like baking it into the business, right? That this is a core part of the company's KPIs and deliverables. And that makes those internal conversations, I think, easier as well for those innovation leads within the business. One of the lovely audience members actually stole my next question in the last panel, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I still think it's a good question. If you could wave your magic wand... what would be one thing you would change about the current industry? Giorgia?
Yeah, it's difficult, but I think that the first wish is that maybe we need brands that start with what we have now. So the first step is changing the mind, changing the method to work together. And so start with the innovation we have now, for example, in our book, that is a large book with different possibilities, like, for example, RenewCell. RenewCell is one of our innovators, so we work with them, and we need the brands use also now the fiber, because we have now the fiber in our warehouse. Also, for example, if we talk about Stony Creek Colors, is another startup that we have in our portfolio and so on. So I think that the first step is start with what we have now, and this is my first wish, I think, and that's it, I think.
Oh yeah, all good.
Sure. So like you said, more bets on seeing if the innovation sells rather than just does it perform. So external testing, brands do a lot of internal testing. Oh, we'll make some product, see how it performs for us, and then it kind of stays there. The consumer doesn't engage with it in any way. So that would be a very welcome change and will drive more change. The second one is the way that regulators and brands approach sustainability is a lot of stick and no carrot. It's you need to change, but you need to make it faster. You need to make it more sustainable. You need to make it cheaper, right? And just as good as what we have today. And we want that yesterday, not in a year, right? So if we start putting more carrot into these sustainability innovations, be it the regulator not just going, you're not allowed to use these things, but you'll get a tax break if you use those things, right? You will see a lot more change. That's what we saw with renewable energy, right? That's what we're seeing now with transitioning from fossil fuels for energy purposes and other things as well. And it's what we need to see overall across all industries if we want to change them to more sustainable. Stick alone doesn't change the world.
Just Nethaji.
Yeah, so if I had the magic wand, I'll say that then all the brands and organization committing to the commitment for the climate, that they actually work on it. It has to be more than words.
Yeah, I want only to add that I think also that brands have maybe to be less scared about innovation and finally be patient, because sometimes innovation require more times, and sometimes we have also brands that want to use an innovation as industrial, but we need maybe 1 year, 2 years to put on the market this innovation. So maybe also to be patient.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think the consensus is we need action, even if it's imperfect action and collaboration. Thank you all for joining me on today's panel. Thank you.
Next up, we have Designing in Harmony with Nature, featuring NFW, Ecovative, Vivo Barefoot, facilitated by Joe from Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Hey everyone, my name's Joe. I lead design activation at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. For those of you who don't know the foundation, we're a charity based here in the UK, but with presence in a few countries around the world, with the sole focus to normalise the circular economy. Design activation, the area I work in, is our effort to use design to activate circular economy solutions, many of which I'm pleased to say have been on display on the stage and downstairs today, and also in doing so to really activate the community of design and creative professionals to turn their talent and their passion towards circular economy outcomes. I've got a fantastic panel with me today to talk about this wave of innovation that we're seeing. We're going to hear different perspectives from brand and from material innovators, from Luke, from Charlotte, and from Connie, who we'll meet in just a moment. But first, since this panel on designing in harmony with nature, we'll centre a bit around around this notion of circularity, or as we say, circular economy. There is, I think, a small difference. I'm going to ask our panel to talk about what it means to them. I'm also going to take the cheeky privilege of doing that myself as well. To me, a circular economy is an economy that is fundamentally different to the economy that we've been used to since the Industrial Revolution, which is really based on these steps of take, make, and waste, with chronic waste and pollution throughout and at the end of that chain. The circular economy is based on different principles. It's eliminating waste and pollution at source, so revealing where waste and pollution emanates and eliminating it at source rather than treating it downstream. Don't take for granted that waste exists, but try and eliminate it where it originates. Circulate products and materials at their highest utility and value for as long as possible. So rather than going straight to recycling, which, in some products or for some materials that might be necessary, try and keep something in use, doing the job that it was intended for as long as possible. And then regenerate nature, give back at least as much or maybe more than we take from natural ecosystems so that they can continue to provide the things that we need and that we rely on for our economy to work. But that's what it means to me. I'd love to hear what circularity, circular economy means to our panel, and in doing so, to tell us how it manifests in your work and introducing your organizations as we do that. Connie, we'll start off with you.
Yes, thank you. So I'll start with introducing Ecovative for those who don't know it. So Ecovative has been around for 17 years, so it's an older player, so there's hope for anybody who is a younger innovator. So very focused on mycelium as a material from the beginning. So very, very deep know-how and R&D in the space. And we have 3 different business units. Just to give you some context, there's a food business with bacon, there's packaging, and then there's forager materials, which I'm representing here today. So at Forager, what we do, we grow 100% bio-based mycelium hides in vertical mushroom farms, so in very big pieces, 1.6 meters wide, up to 30 meters long, and we grow them there. Then we harvest them in also, again, we believe in the structural force of materials, so they're being harvested in big pieces and then processed in tanneries to be finished and very, very highly customizable. And we believe very much in circularity. So, and how that comes to life is our starting product as a food for the mycelium is substrate that gets sourced from as agricultural waste product. So from the local surroundings of a farm. That's the starting point. That's what, again, the food is for the mycelium. We inoculate it, and once it gets harvested after 1 to 2 weeks, then the substrate that is left over gets fed back into the agricultural stream as compost material, and the raw hide we have is also biodegradable and compostable. So we very much are a believer in that, and we practice what we preach.
Very good. Thank you, Connie. And Charlotte?
Yeah. Hi, welcome. Thanks everyone for having us today. I'm Charlotte. I lead the regeneration program at Vivo Barefoot, or Future Regeneration Program, I should say. And Vivo Barefoot is a footwear brand founded in the UK, creating wide, thin and flexible footwear. But it goes beyond that. We have a mission to reconnect people back to nature. And through our footwear, but also through a series of education and barefoot health courses. And in the way that we make our products is also quite different. So what sets them aside is the wide, thin and flexible, but also the materials and the way that we decide to design as a brand. So very similar and very much inspired by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's kind of principles or practicalities for circularity. We design everything in mind with end of life as a starting point. So we have a bit of a tool that we've created that takes every product through, that we score each product every season against a set of criteria around sustainability, circularity and end of life being the main focus there. And so every product is essentially split into 2 key material pillars. The first is polyester for chemical recycling in future, we hope. We partnered with Circ, a chemical recycler, last year, and we're working to develop materials and hopefully one day get to a point where we can put a whole shoe through that process. And on the other side, where we've made possibly the most meaningful change to date is on the natural materials side, in which essentially we're trying to use as many natural materials in footwear as possible for biodegradability at the end of its usable life. It doesn't stop there though. We also have a repair and refurbishment program. So again, in the essence of trying to keep shoes on feet for as long as possible, we want to make them as durable as possible. And so we essentially try to repair and prolong the life of the foot that we create as far as we possibly can. So splitting ourselves into both the natural materials as well as the kind of synthetic, but again, hopefully be able to recapture those through our repair and refurbishment program for reuse and recycling and biodegradability at the end of their life.
Thanks, Charlotte. And Luke?
Hi, I'm Luke. So I'm a chemist with an economics interest. So I'll say that at the start when I break down circular economy and what NFW does. So let's start with circular. There actually is a really great model. In fact, the best model you could ever imagine for circularity. It already exists. It's called nature. Nature makes nutrients in abundance that's hard for humans to really understand. Like, do you know that more new photosynthetic materials, nutrient materials, are produced by nature in an average day on Earth than the combined tonnage of all the toxic petrochemical things that people make in years, one day? Okay, and the plants that are making that photosynthesis, being plants mostly, at least on Earth, on the soil, those nutrients, they cycle up and they cycle down through life forms in huge abundance. And if you think about how nature's principles are, it's very similar to what Joe just laid out, which is nature sort of starts well, stay clean, and ends well. In fact, that's our mantra at NFW is our ground rules are to start, in order to have a chance of ending well, you have to holistically start well and stay clean. So that means you can't put toxic stuff ever in your inputs or in your chemistry, transformations. It has to be holistic in all ways. And then that gets us to economy. Economy is a fundamental human thing, I think. And in order to have an economy, people use various ways to incentivize each other to do work. And you need to create gross margin dollars, I'll say. And if we get to the waving magic wand question, I'd say gross margin percentage.
That's coming up.
Yeah, we can talk about gross margin percentage versus gross margin dollars in a little bit. But in terms of economy, you need to be thinking about whatever your solution is, it needs to be able to scale. And it was well pointed out in the last panel about how many orders of magnitude of difference between where you start as an innovator, maybe in a lab, and where you need to end up as a champion of industry, how many orders of magnitude that is. People don't usually appreciate that. NFW is uniquely positioned. So if you think about, here's shoes that you can grind up and give back to nature because it's 100% petrochemical plastic free and compounds in foams and soles and leather-like materials. Our company makes these compounds so that you can make entire complex products completely petrochemical free and start well, stay clean, end well. To do that, we aren't the people that build the shoe, so we're not the tier 1 manufacturer. We're not the tier 5 or tier 4, which is tier 5 and 4 is like farmers and people who run oil rigs and fracking operations. And we're not the petrochemical industry who's going to take those raw inputs and do different kinds of transformations. We're compounders. So most people don't understand or don't have an everyday experience except in the kitchen about how we all take tier 4, tier 3 type things and we make for ourselves sandwiches or we bring things into our fridge that are sort of tier 2 and then we assemble for our meal as a tier 1. We make a meal. So think of NFW as a tier 2 compounding entity. That makes us very unique, by the way, in the next gen space. We are agnostic to feedstock, except that it has to be non-toxic and generally speaking, natural. It could be biosynthetic if it's at the right price point. But we sit as compounders, and then what we do is it means that when we develop recipes that run in the same compounding equipment that today mixes up and forms and molds toxic petrochemical garbage, it means that you can wholly transform industry from within and inside textile mills, run recipes that are holistically good. You can tip your farmer when you follow the supply chain all the way back to the farmer. You can, in fact, we're working with third parties on how you regeneratively source everything so that our company in the end has a leverage on gigatons of carbon savings, just not so far in the future. So that's what we do.
Fantastic, thank you. So it's a juicy panel, as you can see. We're going to dart around to some of the points that have come up already and pick up on probably on some threads from earlier in the day. One vibe I think that's come through, if we can talk about vibes, is changing relationships between competitors, changing industries, changing materials. And if we think about designing in harmony with nature, I'm not a biologist, but I'd say organisms in nature seem to adapt their environment. Humans often adapt their environment. So when we've become used to levels of cost, comfort, convenience that might have to shift. So Connie, when you think about Ecovative's products, who might have to shift their expectations?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer with who won't. And that's the most powerful player in anywhere and everywhere is the consumer, because the consumer rules with their purse. So I think it's a role of innovators, and I think we have to always stay very truthful there to create products that consumers love. So they have to perform, they have to be cost efficient, and they have to have a great story, and they have to be sustainable. So I think it's just, I learned it the hard way in my career. Consumers just won't change their expectations. So that said, it is obviously a journey to get a product from lab to pilot to commercial scale. And I think the partners who work together on that journey have to have fluid expectations. I don't think they not naturally have to change them at the end state, but I think we've heard that a few times today. I'll give you two examples. One is manufacturing, the way you design with new materials. Like often our materials are called leather alternatives, but that doesn't mean they're leather, they're new class of materials. And I think it's really important that brands are fluid in their expectations. You can't just measure it exactly the same way. You can't work with it exactly the same way. You have to really innovate on the brand side too, with new ways of manufacturing. Maybe it's not the whole product that's made of a new material. Maybe it's a part of it. So really think about it differently. And the other thing is, I think that was touched on also often today, the cost volume curve. So I think if we expect something, economics. Look, I'm an economic with a passion for science. The other way around. So basically, if you look at economics, it's a very real thing. So you can't expect something to be at the end state when the volume is small. I think it needs to be, and that comes to scalability, I very much agree with, there needs to be a path to the end state of of a competitive cost position. But in the beginning, the expectations of how you allocate margins, etc., have to be fluid. So, because otherwise, if volume never comes, cost will never come. So I would say how to do that, I think it needs brands like Vivo, who are very much collaborators with the innovators, who see the big picture, but who also see the path to get to it. So I think it's, again, we see the end state, but oftentimes we don't see the path, how to get to it. And to have fluid expectations on that journey, I think is very important.
Thanks. Charlotte, can I come to you about this notion of the customer then, and if and how they might change their expectations? And do you have to pave the way for them or prepare them for some materials that might today seem unconventional? So a material made of mycelium or fish leather or something like that. Do you need to tell them, and do they actually care?
You do need to tell them. They do care. And I think it's really, really important in terms of changing people's mindsets, behaviors, thought processes around these new materials, in terms of bringing them along on the journey with you. I hate that word journey, but it is a journey and it takes a long time. And for us, so I spoke about the kind of the natural materials space and the products that we've been working with, and the meaningful launches. So we launched a sneaker with natural fiber welding this year, sold out within the first couple of weeks, and it was 98% natural. It was our first time we've ever been able to create a completely natural outsole for a very wide, thin, flexible product, which is very challenging, and also be able to essentially talk very honestly and transparently to customers about that as well. So why is there 2% that's not natural? We needed to speak about that. We put it on the label. This is 98% natural. Hear more about our journey here, and directed customers to the information around what that means. And customers really respect that when you're honest with them. And also, as many people have said today, these aren't drop-in solutions. They are different materials entirely. They behave differently. They behave completely differently when you're in manufacturing processes, when you're, working from tier 5 all the way through to tier 1. And there's so many challenges that we've been working through. We're also partners with Ecovative, so working with the forager foams and the hides, trying to understand what that means for really flexible footwear. And so for us, it's really, really important. And it's also about building integrity with customers, but also showcasing to the rest of the industry what can be done. And so being transparent about not just the things that go right, but the things that actually go wrong is the things that people find interesting. We try and report on that every year in our Unfinished Business annual report. These are all the things which we call fantastic failures, and the champagne moments, if you like, are the things that have gone well. And just being really honest with customers, I think, is really important. We are all customers at the end of the day. We're not just some kind of people far off on the other side that are buying our products. And so actually everyone needs to go on the same journey of understanding the differences around some of these new, more innovative materials, why we're choosing them, because often, obviously, we're trying to get to reducing that environmental impact and kind of maximizing on the social and the positive social and environmental impact as far as we can. And so being able to do that in a way which is honest and transparent with customers is really important.
That's really nice, and it's sort of heartwarming actually that there's a certain faith. I think sometimes in this debate or around the circular economy discourse, there's almost a lack of faith in customers to go with you, but that's sort of what you described as sort of the opposite actually, that they're smart enough to come with you on that. I think we also all want to know what the 2% was.
The 2% is the reinforcements inside. So the reinforcements, the stitching, so the stitching thread and the adhesives.
Okay.
Really challenging.
Some innovation frontiers there for the
Can I just add one more point as well?
Of course,
so I think we've just also launched a program called Vivo Biome, and it's what we hope will be the first biodegradable 3D printed barefoot piece of footwear. And we're taking customers on a trial of that. So actually there's 2,000 pairs, it's a limited run. And actually when a customer enters into this kind of relationship with us in terms of purchasing a pair of those, we're working collaboratively with them to get feedback on how it works, how it operates. We've partnered with a material science company called Belena for the biodegradable compound. And so being able to understand what that looks like and get feedback on the ground about how it wears and how, how we can improve it is really important. So we're actually trialing, testing and phasing and pilots with customers as well as a collaborator.
Very cool. Luke, I think we've all been there as customers, as citizens ourselves, have been at that paralysis when you're stood with something you want to get rid of and you don't know what it's made of. And I think one of the accusations around our sort of industrial world is that the materials palette has become really complicated and fragmented. And how do you're sort of launching innovative materials, not just you, but loads of people in this room, are launching innovative materials into the existing market. How do you navigate that tension? Are you just adding to the sort of mess of materials that we've already created?
So it starts with, again, there's the two sides of circular economy. One is that there's very few materials in our everyday lives that are actually monolithic in any substantial way. So the chairs you're sitting on aren't just compounds of polymers that flow, or sorry, that make a chair. There's other chemistries that have been added in so that it flowed correctly to get to that shape. What a lot of people don't understand is the vast majority of what's wrong with plastic is the extra compounds that are added to the polymer. And it's a really, really fundamentally broken kind of situation because you can't not have the plastics end up in the right shapes, whether it's textile fibers or chairs. So kind of a core thing, if you accept, so our problems, the solution we started with is to say, we won't accept toxicity. And whenever possible, we'll do natural because nature's already vetted materials at huge scale and over a long time for toxicity. And it's photosynthesis driven. So we'll start there and we'll figure out if we can compound natural things where not only is the polymers natural, and there's chitin and chitosan and cellulose, and there's plenty of polymers out there that are natural, that have properties that are in different classes that match different synthetics. But the key thing is, can you get those natural materials to flow and take on shapes and do what they need to do in the manufacturing? So that's the problem really that we took on, is how do you limit, if you can eliminate that, then you've got a keyhole through to a much bigger thing than you might suspect. It's sort of like, some chemists back in the 60s came up with this idea. We're going to make switches smaller with this idea called lithography. We're not going to use light bulb technology to make switches. And people are like, what's that good for? Well, it's in our pockets, right? Like the whole world is different when people figure out a less is more approach to making switches smaller. Moore's law is an inevitable. So the kind of compounding that we're doing has a Moore's law behind it that when you come to Peoria, Illinois sometime, we can show you compounds, show you how they're made, show you where they come from. And when you've seen that, you sort of can't not unsee that anymore. Every single compound that's around us can be made this way. And the key aspect is having that right kernel of a starting point, which is if you're going to end well, you got to start well and stay clean. There's no substitute for that.
So is what you're saying then that if you, in a sense, like in nature, it doesn't really matter where stuff ends up. Like if I took a leaf from Canada, traveled to, I don't know, India and dropped it on the floor, it's not going to be a waste problem.
Not in the same way. Not in the same way, right? I mean, nature's already figured out that when trees fall, and trees, by the way, aren't biodegradable according to the state of California. But when trees fall in, because they take their home for animals for hundreds of years sometimes, that's how long they take to degrade. But you can grind them up and get rid of them without any composting necessary yet today if you want to. But when a tree falls in an ocean, it doesn't make microplastics. The lignocellulosic cement, if you will, that is wood, turns into nutrients for everything else.
So there's sort of an interoperability that we see in nature that you're trying to.
That's right. So
is replicated.
In terms of harmony of nature, what we want to do is put human economy in the center of the circle of life, and in a way where it's completely compatible with the circle of life. And then where NFW is uniquely positioned is, look, if someone has a spider silk replacement, great, it'll run on our platform. If you've got any kind of different adhesives, then it can run on our platform so long as it starts well, stays clean, and end well. So this solution has about, this shoe, which is a grind it up and give it back to nature shoe. It has linen sewing thread, so that didn't come from us. And the designer worked really hard to come up with a really clever way to bond the pliant sole, which is our compound, to the Mirum upper. So it's a matter of, there is a ton of collaboration then in making sure that when you actually design the product, because it's one thing to have a nice new biomaterial, but then the problem is if it's only one nice new biomaterial, to your point, it's going to get mixed with a bunch of other things. So we have to be able to have a palette that's wide enough to be able to make complex things like shoes and cars and clothes out of kind of, you call it monolithically natural and non-toxic. So that's why we sit where we sit. It's a very unique place that's one step further from growing materials and right in the heart of what goes on inside the tier 2, tier 1 manufacturing sort of setting.
We'll come back to this collaboration point in just a moment, but on compatibility, Connie, I know there's Ecovative with the Forager program. You sort of integrate with the existing tanning industry, and sometimes that quote, make something, don't fight the old model, make something that makes the old model obsolete. Sometimes when I walk around downstairs, I think this is sort of a new wave of technology that's different and separate from what we have today. But how are you thinking about leveraging existing infrastructure, the existing practitioners of today, to scale Ecovative products?
We are very big believers in that for different reasons. So using existing infrastructure has dramatic advantages for innovators. Number one, lower capex, and money is real, as we heard several times today. So, and you also have less cost overhead then that you have to allocate over your volume if you can reduce your amount of capex. Number two, scalability. I mean, we work with vertical farms to create our hides and then with tanneries to finish them. And there is a lot of capacity. So basically that speeds up the path to scale quite significantly. That's is very important. Also, market adaptability. Existing infrastructure does have supply and distribution in place, so that once you get over that hurdle of commercial ability, basically, that allows to go much faster. And then also, I'm a believer it's good to create more business for the people who are already in business. That is not a bad thing. Not everything has to be pushed aside for something new to happen. So for those reasons. So we do that through vertical farms and working with existing tanneries. And I keep it short because I really want the magic wand question. So
I was actually joking about that, but I'm going to have to look what you've done.
That was a promise.
Charlotte, on this collaboration point, then. Did I get a sense earlier that Vivo Barefoot is when it comes to pre-competitive collaboration? How are you doing on that? Is there a mindset of the organisation of engaging beyond the walls of your organisation and looking at how the industry moves forward?
I'm going to use this as my magic wand answer.
This is getting very complicated.
Sorry. So yes, we essentially are trying to reach out to as many other brands to partner as pre-competitively as possible. I think there is a significant lack of pre-competitive collaboration across the industry, especially for footwear. And actually, we're all working with the same factories. We're all working with the same manufacturing partners and material innovators and, farms and whoever it might be. And essentially for us, we will get there much faster if we share testing reports, if we were to share and anonymize information and data between us. And we could get there so much faster if we worked more collaboratively rather than singular launches of different. And I know like we're all brands and we're trying to sell products, but actually wouldn't it be a novel idea to have multiple brands collaborating on one product that was launched with multiple innovators with full transparency?
Do you see that mindset reflected in other organizations, or is it a bit of an uphill struggle?
I think it's starting, but I think there's still a kind of competitive edge. And someone spoke about the kind of the sustainability team sitting separately to the commercial team in brands. And I think especially in larger, I come from other larger organizations, and especially in larger organizations, that is definitely still the case. And I think that there is a lot of, there's patents, there's IP, there's so many hurdles and barriers for people to come across. And I think if the appetite is there, I know Vivo is, and I know other smaller brands are, but it would be great to have a collective of smaller and larger organizations that are able to scale and lift this collectively.
Okay. I'd love to know how you, as an organization, got over that hump of like nervousness about doing that, but maybe that is for after, because I've already had the 5-minute warning. And we have the magic wand question. One thing that when we think about circular economy, the end of life is really important. And actually, one observation today for me is that it probably hasn't been discussed that much. I think there's more focus on the very, very exciting new materials that could enter the economy, and maybe a bit less on the sort of business model or the conditions that are required to make sure that those materials end up in the right place or don't end up in the wrong place. Is that just me? I'd love to hear, Luke, maybe from you. Do we need to talk more about end of life, or is it just that if you start well and you keep it clean, then it doesn't really matter?
Well, it'd be nice if everyone did start well and stay clean, right? But to your point, I mean, this comes down to this. The concept mentioned earlier, which is externalization of the negative externalities are all pushed out of the business models of a lot of folks. I mean, Vivo is here. They're really, really unique. There are people inside Vivo that are not driven solely by gross margin percentage. That's supposed to be a mic drop, but so in other words, there are brands out there that they won't do the right, and it's usually the biggest brands, the ones that have stockholders that are on public markets that are looking at profitability metrics, and it's a very near-term activity because I want to buy a stock today and 3 months later I want to retire because whatever. And so you've got you got tons and tons of volume, by the way, in those big brands. And they can't sometimes afford to do sustainability, not because they don't make money. They can make gross margin dollars. But if they can't hit gross margin percent targets, they won't adopt. That's too much risk. So that locks out certain kinds of innovation from the start, just from the fact of, it's not that sustainability can't make money. It can make a lot of money. The problem is for some people's profitability metrics that tie to stock price, they can't afford to take the risk of not making enough money.
So does that explain why something like end of life innovations might be underinvested? So then when you externalize that cost, and the true cost, by the way, of those gross margin percentages in dollars doesn't include the end of life of the shoe. Okay, a shoe is a toxic tip. The vast majority, statistically speaking, all shoes are toxic garbage, and no one gets any money to get rid of toxic garbage. There will never be recycling of shoes in that kind of system. It's impossible. And I'm making an economic argument. And to look at the opportunity, then you were saying earlier that a ground up one of these,
this is nutrients. Someone
might pay for that.
We can afford, our company can afford to run a take back program, no cost to the brand, because we get to sell this as nutrients into other industries and or use it ourselves. The rubber, it turns out that there's a unbelievable technical innovation behind this rubber, where it's the world's first Vitromer system, where the same rubber mixer that mixes up the compound in the first place also becomes the recycling system. So what that highlights is, a petrochemical refinery, there's hundreds of trillions of dollars of landed assets around the world that take the form of things like petrochemical refineries. Petrochemical refineries are unbelievably engineered to do one thing well, which is take crude oil in terms of natural gas and make a plethora of virgin chemical stock. A petrochemical refinery has no idea what to do with an old shoe. And it never, ever will, because we don't have hundreds of trillions of dollars. The biggest ways in which the innovators in this room compete is for dollars. There's a scant few billions of dollars available in the world for innovation that's supposed to change the world. In the meantime, what we're doing is lobbing weapons at each other, and the biggest polyester plants in the world are being funded by low-cost oil from. Anyway, we can all see the news.
Yeah.
So that's a real issue.
Just before we wrap up, then I've got one final question. If you ever had a magic wand.
What a
surprise. World peace.
Connie, what would your ask be to the industry then?
Yes, I wave my wand 3 different directions quickly. 1, consumer, understand plastics as a health issue, not only an environmental issue. I agree fully with Luke, it's a dangerous material. If they understood, that would create demand. Number 2, brands, volume. Because if we can't climb down the cost curve without volume commitments, it's not possible. It is a well understood economic concept. Number 3, regulators. Think about incentive over punishment. And if you think about punishment, go global. Because Europe is in particular very, very strong at creating local regulation that does nothing else but push production out of Europe. And then you have achieved exactly nothing. So those would be my 3 quick.
I think that was a magic lamp.
I know.
It's a 3-color
Very
LED.
true.
It's a 3-color LED. Red.
Charlotte, you already made your wish, but can you reiterate it for us?
Yes, with the bolt-on, which is operating with transparency, not being afraid, and being courageous around being transparent about the things that go well and the things that don't go so well, because that's where we learn the most. So the transparency piece, and then the pre-competitive collaboration piece is just so important.
And Luke?
That the true costs from start through finish are realized and properly measured and then adjudicated when we think about how we incentivize our economy and how gross margin dollars flow. I wasn't a very good historian. I was a better chemist in school than historian, but there's one history lesson I think I know anyway. Someone can teach me something better later. But gross margin dollars rule the world. When you have gross margin dollars behind you, whether you're taxing other people's gross margins or whether you just own that, then you get to do what you want. So we got to have the right kind of models that generate gross margin dollars that really, truly look at the full stack of true costs. When we have that, humans will get busy collaborating with each other and doing things a lot more towards peace and a lot less towards warring with each other over things.
Thank you. I was a history student, but a really bad one. But I sometimes think if I could go back and put myself in the Stone Age or the Iron Age or the Dark Ages, would it seem like this would never end? And I think sometimes when we think this linear economy is so fixed, and the way that we make and use things is sort of, it doesn't seem to shift, and it can be quite depressing. But epochs and eras have ended before and moved on to something different and better, and I think that's what gives me hope with the circular economy, as well as the innovations that we've heard a lot about today. So thank you to Luke, to Charlotte, and to Connie for the conversation.
Now for the final panel discussion of the day, to talk about the very important topic of policy and regulation. I'd like to invite on stage George from Action Speaks Louder, Rachel Arthur from the UN Environment Programme, and Abby Morris from Compare Ethics.
Well done for making it to the last panel, the smallest panel, which makes my job a lot easier. So excuse me if I interrupt and join in the panel, which I have a habit of doing. I really like Joe's quote at the beginning, which is one of my favourites from Buckminster Fuller, which is, don't fight the old model, but make a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And I think with policy, we should think of that as innovation as well. When we think of innovation, we often think of startups, a lot of people in the room from a kind of similar place. But policy innovation, while it's less sexy, I think it's sexy, it's very important. And I think it's perhaps one of the most innovative things that we can do for sustainability. We're currently living in a kind of paradigm where most of the rules of the game for sustainability have been created by corporations over the last, 30 to 40 years. And we are now moving into an era where that's more dictated by actual changes to the rules of the game. And we're in this situation of kind of voluntary versus mandatory sustainability, with voluntary sustainability being the status quo. A very good recent example is Unilever, who for a long time have been held up as a paradigm, I use that word again, of business ethics, particularly in the plastic space, which is where I kind of come from, who've ditched a lot of their plastic targets or massively downscaled them at the time of the Plastics Treaty. All the while, having been held up as this absolute sort of star of sustainability. So that is the limitations of voluntary. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rachel from UNEP and Abby from Compare Ethics. I will start with my first question, which I've got to remember what it is and be able to read my handwriting. So with the glut of policy over the last few years, whether it's due diligence, supply chain, green claims, waste, or eco-design, the rules of the game are changing very fast for fashion. Can you give us a snapshot of what it might look like in 2 years' time for a fashion brand to operate in this new context? I'll start with Abby.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I think that over the next 2 years, there's only going to be two really core, clear outcomes. It's either going to be that we finally did what we came to do and actually normalise a transition and make that part of our business as usual, or it will be the biggest missed opportunity in history. And that there's no other outcome. There's no other margin of outcome that's going to be here. And I think that that's mostly because if we don't create the right foundations and breeding ground, the incentive alignment, the regulatory frameworks to actually take action very quickly over the next 18 to 24 months, like it's happening right now, all of the things that we've been talking about today, whether it's around chemicals, whether it's around new materials, whatever it might be, become literally obsolete overnight. Because we've all talked about some of those barriers, and I'm very excited, but at the same time, I've seen missed opportunities happen before, so I want to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm going to make sure I promise that we end on a really positive note, but that's where I'm starting.
And Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really fair point. And we certainly live in a world where we're at huge risk of the things that are being put out there that we know need to happen, get watered down, which I know we'll come on to for various reasons as to why that might be the case. So it's just about how do we ensure that's not the outcome of it all. I do think there's some pockets of things that look incredibly interesting. There's obviously the sort of the baseline of the work that needs to be done that Abby can definitely speak way more articulately to than me, particularly around the data gathering side of things. But I think there's a few pieces that are coming that I think could be incredibly interesting for our sector, but also present real challenges. And I'll give you one example, and that's that Sweden, France, and Denmark just proposed that there is an update to the Basel Convention in terms of waste being, textiles being included in that waste framework, which becomes incredibly interesting when we start to think about what does that actually quite literally mean for the export of textiles, and how, and I think this comes into a lot of the different policies, how do we define what we actually mean by that? What is textile waste, and what is hazardous textile waste? I think there's one example that was written in one of the pieces that I was looking at that says a hazardous textile waste is something stained with chemicals or paint. Well, what if it's stained with other stuff that, obviously humans manage? Or indeed, what if it's just synthetics full stop? Does that count as hazardous? Like, where do we draw the line? And we see that in lots of other examples of other policies where, some of the stuff in France, what do we count as ultra fast fashion? Actually, what is the definition of that? So I think there's going to be lots of quite interesting things over the next couple of years that we need to get our heads around to be even able to make these policies viable.
Definitely. And I think that speaks to the kind of policy magic wand, which I might add in later, which is like if you wave a policy magic wand and you don't have all the data correct and you don't have all those assumptions really worked out, you can create a lot more harm than good. Talking about greenwashing, which is one of the kind of major battlegrounds of regulation, the UK, Canada, Europe, all over the world, there's been kind of lawsuits, green claims, struck off. I've been a very vocal greenwashing addict, so that's been my personal battle cry as well. I personally see green claims as a privilege, not a right, so that kind of contextualizes my viewpoints on it. But Abby, you've built an amazing platform which actually helps companies to make accurate green claims. Can you talk a little bit how companies are responding to the kind of wave of regulation, and then also a bit around kind of green hushing, whether that is actually a threat or just a lazy excuse?
Yeah, as anyone who might know me, even the slightest spending 2 minutes with me will probably know how obsessed I am with this topic, because again, I just see so much opportunity when you get it right. And we have a community alongside our business, and we speak to hundreds of global retailers every few months. So we're always checking in on this, and we're about to launch new data with more details on the sentiment next week. But what I can say today is, right now, this is a risk issue, and there is a real risk of a huge missed opportunity that because of the fact that many regulators are coming out with 10% of global fines and turnover in the UK, 4% of Europe. Oatly was fined and had to settle with their investors $9 million. This has actually just caused a bit of paralysis because, again, I've literally been sitting with leaders within global listed companies, and they're like, my board is like, how much now? And do you realize that that will make us bankrupt overnight? Because not all of us are doing really well at the moment. And I think the reality is then like the benefit of having that privilege becomes really hard. So even if then it like blocks the rest of the food chain on investing in all these things, because if the brands can't feel confident to communicate on their progress, this will all stall. So like, I'm so passionate that we have to unlock it. And that's very much what I've kind of set out to do, which is give the brands the confidence, talk to the regulators so that our platform can actually give every single environmental claim the assurance that it's compliant, it's got the privilege, it's got the right. But that's why this 18-month period is so critical, because if we could get people confident talking about good claims based on good data that they've invested in, fantastic. But if they all stick their head under the sand and just do the minimum compliance, this whole food chain gets blocked. And the opportunity's gone. So I'm just very passionate, as you can tell. But I think that's where the kind of sentiment of green hushing or not, I think that ultimately right now, brands are indeed scared of getting it wrong, but I think that there are ways of getting this right, and the regulators do want to get this right. So I think there is a window of opportunity where that is going to change really soon.
Yeah, and just to build, I think I've had some interesting conversations recently where it is stalling progress already, you know, where this green hushing phenomenon is making one particular large denim brand I was speaking to, who said, you know, it is literally stopping me from being able to do my job. He works on the innovation side of the business. And because, you know, they're scared that we're not going to be able to market it, and therefore we're not going to put the budget into this in the first instance, which is, quite a scary thought. But I think at the same time as that, obviously we know that this is really necessary. I think, you know, I presume a lot of you are brands in the room, and actually having really clear guidelines is a huge help, and sort of being the clearer the better on it, essentially, so that, as you say, we can then move past the point of being too concerned about it, because we know exactly what means we will get it right.
Exactly. There are two core things that we have to solve. One is risk mitigation, i.e. what we do is we take the greenwashing risk off the table because we assure the outcome. And the other part is cutting the cost. So by using AI on our platform, you can cut the cost by up to 80%. These are two things that align incentives that get the claims out the door to then reinvest in more data collection and more impact reduction. But if we don't have those really clear business cases, it all gets stuck.
I think it's just great to have like the tools at hand, and like I've certainly seen an uptick in the last couple of years of just being pulled into conversations with brands, or like I now work for an NGO, so you know people like to use my labour for free, but you know getting pulled into that, being like, what is your? I'm not saying anything about this panel, by the way. Delighted to be here. Get pulled in for your expertise because people are just kind of fumbling around, not knowing exactly what the right thing to do is. So I think Comparethics is amazing for that, just making it super simple. Going from the kind of micro of green claims, that is a big issue, to the macro of global level issues. I mentioned the Plastics Treaty in the introduction. Whatever your thoughts are on the kind of merits or detractions of the Plastics Treaty, it is a good sort of push by international multilateral governance to tackle a huge pernicious problem, and saturated with petrochemical lobbyists as well. Do you think there is scope for this kind of macro level approach on fashion? I know you mentioned the kind of clothing waste element. Do you think we could have like a fashion treaty?
Don't know. There has been, lots of sort of talk and suggestions. Obviously, UNEP oversees the Global Plastics Treaty. I think that it's really important that we are having those kind of conversations, certainly. And we are hearing countries at least asking for some sort of holistic and cohesive dialogue about it. And I think that's a really important thing to say, because it's really easy for us to sit here and talk about what's happening in the EU. And it's really easy for us to say, there's stuff happening in the US, and maybe Chile's doing something as well. But actually, it doesn't really matter if we don't have all of the countries that operate in textiles full stop at the table having these discussions, because there are unintended consequences with all of this work. We're obviously not just talking about environmental side, we've got to talk about the social side of things as well. So whilst I can't say to you that, I think there'll be a treaty for fashion or for textiles, I do think that that there is scope for these level of conversations. We had a couple of countries, it was Turkey and the Netherlands, calling for it at a side event at UNEA 6 in February, which is the UN Environment Assembly. And so it's been tabled as such, which is quite interesting to then start thinking about. And I think just full stop, that sort of global coordination mechanism is really, really important, I think, to kind of think across geographies, because we're so good at thinking in silos as businesses, but, governments and policymakers as well. So, that's obviously what the UN exists for. So hopefully that there's something there that can kind of come from it. And also that, with all of this transition we're looking at, policymakers full stop have to be absolutely pivotal, are pivotal in it. We know that, we know the voluntary side of things, as you mentioned at the beginning, are not fundamentally working. So, TBC, but I think we'll start seeing more and more happening with global policymakers engaging it. And you'd be quite surprised at some of the countries that are willingly engaging in it.
Very interesting. I'm going to swing the conversation slightly towards one of my favourite elephants in the room. And the elephant also has a magic wand in its trunk, so we're lucky there, which is degrowth. Bel and I were catching up outside about how we can tend to be so sort of narrow-minded about these things, particularly when we're talking about innovation, which is about growth, it's about startup, it's about scaling, and ignore the kind of wider emergency that we're in, that we do need to shrink parts of the economy in a planned way. I think one of the things that is forgotten about degrowth is it's about scaling up some industries that are beneficial and scaling down others which are catastrophic to the kind of global planetary health. If you had a magic wand and you could create innovative policy around degrowth, what would you conjure up? Start with Abby.
I was going to say, normally I would definitely refer to Rachel on this. This is definitely her level of expertise. I would say a lot of the things we've already talked about, but I want to give a really tangible example that we've done very well with the sticks. Like, they're feeling the sticks. Global brands feeling that. We need to now really come in very strongly with incentive, particularly around how we can de-risk innovation. So in the UK, I think I've given this a few times, but I love this example. In the UK, we're actually the leaders in investing in startups. And one of the main drivers for that is for 30p of every pound that you invest, as an investor in the UK, you can get a little tax break, tax incentive. And it kind of really de-risks your investment, because if that company goes out of business, you get a third of your money back. And I don't understand why we're not really, as an industry, coming together with really tangible proposals, whether it's at a global level or, at a national level, to really start thinking about how can we de-risk so that companies invest in getting to scalability on some of these core innovations or tackling some of these really hard challenges, knowing full well that they'll get a little bit of their cash back at the end. Now, is that a silver bullet to a magic wand, definitely not. But I think there needs to be new levels of creativity and some very, very specific policy asks. There's a huge window of opportunity around engaging politicians in the UK. They're all looking for a really nice soundbite at the moment. Like, why aren't we like spoon feeding this to them to really kind of galvanise what is a really key sector to the economy? So could talk about that bit for ages, but my magic one would be, let's give some more innovation. Yeah.
And I think that kind of speaks as well to like a conversation that we've heard across the room today around incentive.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you just take, for example, eco-design in the waste framework directive, and how that didn't include any kind of incentives for recycling or reuse. It was all stick, and none of the kind of carrot element. But Rachel, I know you're more of an expert on degrowth than me, so your magic wand.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges here, this is not answering the question on policy specifically, but is just terminology, right? It's really difficult to use the word degrowth in a boardroom. So we talk about overconsumption and we talk about oversupply, and starting to think about how those things can be addressed. And for those, I have a very long shopping list. But I think some of it is happening, right? So if you look at what's happening in France and the potential surcharge there on the undefined ultra-fast fashion, that's one example. But the interesting bit in that is the suggestion or proposal within it that we would have a ban on advertising of ultra-fast fashion, and that would extend to influencers. I think that becomes really interesting. If you look at sort of degrowth academia, from those economists, number one thing they say on there is removing advertising. Removing fast fashion is always one of the examples as well. So I think there's quite a lot there that's potentially playing into that. It will be really interesting to see what happens in France, where that goes, whether it does indeed past the next stage. It's looking like it's going to. And if that's the case, what that could kind of set for other countries and for the sector at large. There's obviously quite a lot of controversy in it, but also a lot of very interesting things there. My work very specifically with UNEP is focused on the consumption side of things and looking particularly at the role of advertising and marketing or narrative shift, how we shift cultures basically. So I'm following that intensely because we're doing quite a lot of work with influencers particularly. I then think, to your point, incentives, but how do we get those incentives for circular business models so that we actually start seeing revenue growth from circular business models? At the end of the day, for degrowth to become a reality, it's got to be about us driving, we don't want to see the end of business. So how do we drive revenue from streams that are not about virgin production? And what does that look like? Circular business models is our sort of most obvious route, but nobody's doing it in a scalable way at this point. So how do we incentivize and facilitate that? I also think, and this is a shout out to the Fashion Revolution team in the room and some other organisations that are focused on this, how do we make it mandated that we have to declare production volumes? We don't at all at the moment, and I think that is a huge starting place, not least because it would help facilitate a lot of the other policies if we actually knew how much is being produced, how much is being sold, how much is being wasted, and so on. And the final thing I have on my list for today, I'm sure there's many more that I've forgotten, but also living wage. Like at the end of the day, if we can produce less items but pay more for them, then we can ensure a just transition as well. So how do we make sure that all of that's integrated into the way that we're thinking about this policy too?
Nice. Well, genies grant 3 wishes and plastic elephants in the room with wands grant, however many you had. So well done. Okay. And finally, and I think we should have time for Q&A after this as well, we are going to see a huge amount of changes this year in terms of elections. I forget what the number it is, but I think it's something like a third of the world or a quarter of the world is going to be voting in democratic elections this year, including in the UK and in the European Parliament. There has already been signs of a kind of backlash from companies against green actions and backlash on policy front in various different jurisdictions. What do you think the role of innovative brands will be in ensuring that if policy backslides, that they don't also do a Unilever and backslide?
Yeah, I think that it's not about, I don't think it's clear like on the backslide. I really don't. Let me just give you like a fundamental example. Whilst, let's take Europe, because essentially that's what we're talking about, where they've been leading on a lot of this regulation. The reality is we all, as consumers, as citizens, expect what is in our products to be true and accurate and last. This is under consumer protection law. It's been around for a really long time. There's a global consumer protection law movement. So if everything else on waste and all of those things, which I highly doubt because there is generally a global movement on a lot of these situations, as Rachel's pointed out, I really do not see the fundamentals changing, that as citizens we expect these things to happen. Because right now, like for example, in the UK, we're currently with the Conservative Party, the CMA have pressed ahead. Regardless, in the UK, we won't be going further to the right, as I don't suspect that will to be the case overall. So whilst there are coarse nuances, and obviously the US plays a key role, as global businesses, as long as there is one market, one country, i.e. France, that continues, companies will always take the strongest compliance requirements and apply that anyway. So we don't need it to be perfect. We just need like a little bit to stay. And it's already going to be enough to create a degree of a tipping point to shift, because individual countries, whether we talk about waste or what have you, are already pressing ahead with already some of these dynamics. So I don't see it stalling to the point of no return.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think even if things are being watered down, hopefully that watering down is things like, the size of business you have to be to comply with it, or the year that it happens and so forth, and not actually the fundamentals of the policy, though that is sometimes the case. So that said, that means that hopefully that direction of travel is the case anyway. So I think for businesses, it's about getting your ducks in a row, full stop. We have to be prepared for things that are coming, being proactive about it, whatever happens in election time, knowing that it could all be a possibility, and then you are ready. And I think the other really big thing on this is making sure that with that work, there's also an extra level of work that's done internally around getting that buy-in piece, having that advocacy internally for this work, and recognizing how often in these big businesses we have parts of the business that are lobbying for the complete opposite, and how do we make sure as best as we can that that's not actually the case.
Yeah, I would 100% echo that as well. I think one of the best things that should be in any sustainability policy is support for systemic legislative change, and particularly as smaller businesses, startups, innovators, to have those conversations with policymakers and say we need these incentives. Like, it goes a very, very long way. Policymakers are listening to an enormous amount of industry interests from the kind of status quo side of things, that often it can really stand out when you have the innovators saying this is the kind of positive change we need to see.
Just really quickly on that, but we also really need to spoon feed them. Like, having worked in policy for well over a decade, like, it needs to be like so spoon fed in terms of the option. I'll give you a great example. One of the core backlashes around Green Claims Directive and others around green claims was this sort of understanding, and this is more broadly this concept of like the compliance burden, the cost base, et cetera, but we need to be spoon feeding the technology. Like, actually, no, did you know you can cut the cost of doing this manually by up to 80%? Like, there's no reason why you can't communicate that data across borders very easily. So we need to all come together, whether you're an innovator, whether you're a brand, whether you're a regulator, to make sure that the positioning is super articulate on what some of these barriers are, because there's nothing worse than super bad regulation.
Yeah, I think you don't need to watch a select committee recording, albeit one, to know that the level of sustainability literacy is pretty low. I think we have time for a few questions. Yeah, we have 5 minutes for a few questions. Yeah.
Rachel, you mentioned that in the conversation that you'd had with one of the brands, that they said the upcoming regulation was actually stifling innovation. We were hopeful that actually the regulation would help accelerate innovation, because there are commitments that they need to meet in terms of like recycled content or traceability. Could you share a bit more on what you're seeing in that space in terms of it actually stopping innovation from moving forward versus the opposite?
Yeah, this was specifically around greenwashing. So with the sort of rules coming in around what you can and can't say, the sort of phenomenon of green hushing, where brands are now being too scared to say anything, the sort of, with this particular example, but I've anecdotally heard others thinking the same, it's been that, what's the point in putting money into something if we're never going to be able to talk about it? I mean, there's something in that, I think, to be said around whether these businesses are only in it to market it anyway, rather than a sort of fundamental business model shift, which hopefully we would be leaning more towards the latter. But in that particular example, it was because of the fact that they wouldn't be able to, PR, put a press release out about it, that they wouldn't then put the funds into it in the first place, or certainly not to do it at the scale that maybe they would have done before. Hopefully some of the experimentation was still there. Hope that makes sense.
I was going to just quickly add to that for like other examples. I feel like where a lot of companies are at the moment is that they have obviously done some investment. I feel like that's why I was saying about a window of opportunity. I feel like the time is now that they can actually start capital. Like, I feel like we should actually just call the elephant in the room. They are doing to get the press release out. They're literal mechanics of how they make money, because we're not yet in a circular economy where we can see the value from all these other ways of doing business. Like, they're literally made and created to get that value out in terms of and so I feel like rather than we should just call a spade and work with it and lean into it so that we can get the reinvestment into these things to then move on to other business models. Because honestly, that's the main window that we have now, which is there's been some investment, fantastic. We need to get those claims keep going out so that they invest further and do it really deeply. Yeah.
Great questions. Luke, was that? Yeah.
Yeah, John.
There's a treaty on global plastics going through the UN right now. I was wondering what your thoughts on that, and in particular towards giving California, France, the Netherlands foundation to stand on when it comes to some of these things about where they come from, impacts on human health, etc.
If you are on the good side of history, not to be too binary about it, the other side are doing this incredibly well. We have to take a leaf out of the playbook of the fossil fuel industry that they've been playing for years and get down and dirty in terms of advocacy, if you want to call it advocacy, or lobbying, if you want to call it what it actually is, because they are there and they are massively outnumbering the NGOs sort of cowering below big plastics. I think in terms of the conversations happening there, what is not being focused on is reduction. And that is where the battleground is really divided, that we absolutely have to reduce the production of petrochemicals. There is just no way to decarbonize the petrochemicals industry and keep the levels of growth that they want, because it will just be sucked up in a second. So I think if there is one kind of conversation to be pushed for at those kind of multilateral events, and if countries who are supporting that kind of position can form together. I know there's the High Ambition Coalition and all sorts of different country permutations like there is at COP, but for me that has to be where the division is in any of these kind of treaties, whether it's on textiles or plastics or COP or anything else, is that whether you call it degrowth, overproduction, overconsumption, all that sort of stuff, that we just cannot carry on at the same levels as we currently are. I think we're at the end. But thank you so much, and thank you to my wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much. And now that wraps up our programming for the day. I just want to say a huge heartfelt thank you to all of our speakers, to my team who have been meticulously planning and executing the exhibition downstairs and also this event. And then also to every single one of you in this room for your continued efforts to do better for the industry and the planet. So now I'd like to invite you all to head downstairs to see the exhibition, and there'll be more drinks and canapes served. So thank you, everyone.